Maxwell looked me over, nodding in approval. Third authority only a few months after starting training. Your talent is good then. You should have no issues in the magisterium. Well, I only have one concern. I asked. My summons, my guns, are way too lethal. I mean, I can't just dial down their power. That's not how they work. So if I ever have to fight anyone, like in tournaments or whatever, I wouldn't worry too much about that. A majority of your battles in the magisterium are going to be against the scourge or in artificial hunting grounds. The times you will turn your weapons against a fellow magus are few, and even then, you may be exempt due to the nature of your power. After all, you aren't the first to have this problem of excessive lethality. Oh, good. So, other than fighting, what exactly do we do there? The time to enter the magisterium was coming. I had one more month. The past 4 months had been filled with constant fighting and working. I had learned more than I ever expected since arriving, and Maxwell had helped raise me to the third authority. I was a whole new man who had been reforged through the fires of those dastardly trenches. Or, I should say the smoke. You could get high just by breathing the air of that place. Learned that the fun way. Anyway, going from all this to a school wasn't a change in pace that I was quite prepared for. But then again, I didn't think I would be stopping my work. I still wanted to make money despite having tons in my savings, even if only occasionally. Maxwell sat back in his chair while letting out a breath. Normally there are 3 things you do at the magisterium. You learn their summoner calls, cultivate your authority, and fight. But since you're learning my call, you won't be learning theirs. So you'll be cultivating using the formations they give you and learning to fight against the scourge. Remember that the sole purpose of the magisterium is to develop elite soldiers that can fight the scourge. Therefore you'll be fighting alongside the military rather often, especially since you'll be jumping straight into the higher ranks of the school. Alright. And how long should I expect to be there? Depends on how fast you climb to Authority 5. It's at about that level that they tend to transition you to the military, unless you show enough talent to climb higher in a short amount of time. Even in that case though, they would still have you hunting as a part of more specialized units. Also, I should warn you of something. Maxwell's face turned a little ponderous. By going to the magisterium, you're signing yourself away to the kingdom. In exchange for the cultivation spell formations of higher levels, you are required to fight for them or contribute something to the cause. If you were a warlock then you could study to become an enchanter, but you aren't, so you're destined to join the military should you choose this path. Otherwise, you refrain from entering and go your own way, but then you won't be able to advance anymore. Unless you find an organization that would give you the summoner spell formations for higher authorities. So if I want to get stronger, I have to work for somebody. Nothing is ever free, especially in our line of work. The cost of those white crystals are high, multiplying with each higher level. And the cultivation formations even more so. Though, there is one way that you can avoid the military and still go to the magisterium. What's that? If you get recruited by the church. He eyed me curiously. Are you a believer, John? In? The church that believes in Jesus Christ the Savior and Son of God, headed by the Pope, and the greatest nemesis of the demonic plague that is the scourge. Oh, well I didn't really know about the scourge part, but yes, I'm a Christian. I'm American after all. Though if I'm being specific, my parents raised me Catholic. I spoke, but inwardly, I was surprised. I didn't realize they would also have Christianity here. It seemed to be exactly what I knew it as on Earth. Getting curious, I asked. Are there any other religions? Of course. The only significant religion is Theravada, comprised of those who believe in gods that represent the different aspects of nature. You could also say they worship magic in a sense. Those people have primarily come from the pillars of creation. What's that? The only other kingdom that has been able to stand and survive against the scourge, other than the kingdom of Dragon's Tongue. They are human, but vastly different from us in terms of magic. And because we are separated by vast distance, very little occurs between us. Most people don't even know they exist, believing that our kingdom is the last bastion of humanity in this world. Oh. I nodded. And are there any denominations of the church? Obviously, but they are inconsequential. They have tried and failed to make reforms, and very little actually give them the time of day. So they have resorted to forming underground cults that you'll never hear of. Interesting. Anyway, since you are a believer and have no affiliations or background to speak of, then you might have a chance of getting recruited. Unlike other cold summoners, I see great potential in your weapons. Truly, they are lethal, and against the scourge, that means everything. I have no doubt that you will rise to great heights, but I only hope that you are capable of keeping yourself safe. Remember that defense is your greatest weakness. Yeah, I'm a glass cannon. Perfect analogy. He smirked at me. Over time, I had begun to feel the great deficiency that was my defense. My offense was amazing, but if I really got hit by a strong attack, I was done for. At some point I would no longer be able to kill my opponents before they hurt me, and that would be the day I either found another solution, or died. I should buy armor. Yes, that would be a good investment, especially for you. But take some time to find what kind of armor you like. Perhaps when you begin to fight against the Scourge, you'll know what type of armor will benefit you best. Alright. Now, what should I do until I enter? Work on the call. Maxwell nodded. Yes, extensive study will help you best. I should have you memorize the more complex spells and formations for the higher authorities. Oh geez. I let out a sigh. It was going to be a long month. A few more weeks passed. My savings climbed by the day, and although I wasn't rich like the others in the company, I still had a sizable amount of money lying around. Only a week before I entered the magisterium, I was actually notified by the Polaris Bank to come in. It was there that I met the clerk, and he gave me some good news. Congratulations, John. Because you have surpassed 500,000 coins stored with us, we have upgraded your tier in accordance with your company's platinum level. You now have access to 2 new perks, along with no longer needing to pay a fee for continual storage. The clerk handed me a platinum card, taking my gold one away. The platinum one had fancy designs on it, looking far more luxurious than the gold one. First, the platinum tier allows you to take out loans with 0% interest. Depending on the amount, you are assigned a date to pay back the loans, usually amounting to a few years. Secondly, you can now insert normal items other than coin into the card in order to store it in our secure warehouse. Eligible items include jewels, weapons, small containers, and anything else that can fit within the expanded card. Go ahead and try pulling the card apart. Okay. Getting excited, I grabbed the 2 edges of the card and pulled. The entire thing expanded, metal unfolding as if generating new material from nowhere. It ended up as a large box that you could easily drop many things into, so long as they weren't excessively bulky. The only drawback to this storage method is that the card only works within the bounds of the capital city. If you ever leave, be sure to retrieve anything you might need beforehand. And if you don't have one already, I suggest acquiring a spatial sack in order to transport items on your person no matter where you go. What's that? And where can I find one? I asked curiously. I was about to be entering the magisterium, and we would no doubt be leaving the city occasionally. This spatial sack sounded like it could help me. A spatial sack is a small bag that can contain items beyond its normal volume. But because of their utility, they are normally very expensive. If you were to spend the entirety of your savings, you would be able to buy a medium-grade sack. Damn. Well, I'll think about it. Thanks for the info, and the card. Of course. As a new platinum client under a platinum company, you are no longer required to pay a percentage fee for our services as your company pays a universal rate for all its members. Nice. I was smiling as the clerk finished with everything he had to say. Afterward, I left the bank and called Rayla. Hey, sweet cheeks. Hey. I was wondering if I should buy a spatial sack. You could, but honestly, it's not totally necessary for you. Her voice turned explanatory. With all your weapons being summons and your coin being taken care of by the card, the only loose items you carry on you are that mask and recovery pills. But if you really want it, I suggest getting one of the lower-end sacks. They hold enough space to contain a bunch of small items, which is perfect for you. That is, if you want to spend around 50 gold bullion for one. Maybe. We'll see. I'm just thinking if I'll need something like that for the magisterium. That's right. You're entering soon. She went quiet for a moment. Just think on it for a while. Oh, and by the way, Plex told me to tell you to keep your schedule clear about 3 days before your official entrance. That means no work. Alright. Care to tell me what he's planning? But then it wouldn't be much of a surprise. Tell me. Nope. My lips are sealed, pretty boy. You just sit back and wait for me to send you the location. She spoke haughtily before hanging up. I was left rolling my eyes with a smile. From then on, I didn't see Rayla or the others. It seemed like they were avoiding me. And so a few more days passed, coming upon the day of my surprise. Since I didn't have anything to do, I slept in and woke up leisurely. I also went to a restaurant for breakfast, even though the sun had already set. After that I hung around for a few hours, spending some time probing my third star dimension for any spirits that might be worth communing with. And finally, once 2 a.m. hit, I got a message. Head to the caviar restaurant. It was from Rayla, and the name surprised me a bit. This restaurant was located within the Black Spider Market, and it was the highest-end restaurant I knew of. It was never particularly busy, but I knew that the reason for that was the expense. Dressing somewhat nicely, I finally left my room and headed into the market. Seeing the market slightly busy reminded me that there was another upcoming auction. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to work it since I would be busy entering the magisterium. Because of that, Rayla would either take the auction off or work in a trio with some of the others. It didn't take me long to make it to the restaurant. It was a fancy building with formally dressed attendants, an entire orchestra playing within, and magical lights that set a wonderful mood. I walked in and met a host who smiled courteously. "Hello, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "I think so. My name is John." "Ah, I was told you'd be coming. Please head to the 16th floor." "Thanks." Being guided to an elevator, an attendant pressed the button for me. I got a little anxious as we rose, wondering what they had planned. I had naturally guessed that it had to do with my entrance, so I wondered if it was just a congratulatory party. Ding! We made it to the floor, and the door opened. But the room I was let out on was totally dark. Not even the light from the elevator could illuminate the darkness, as if it was artificial. Stepping out, the elevator doors closed, leaving me in pitch darkness. My hand twitched a bit, my mind subconsciously communing with my double-barrel shotgun. Then, the lights came on, revealing my friends of the company. Surprise! Poof! Rainbow lights scattered in the air as everyone jumped with a cheer. It was funny though, because there were only 4 of them, and 3 were men. Their voices were all deep, making it seem dull. I laughed with a pretend scare. "Ah, I'm so scared." As if. "Get over here." Rayla rolled her eyes and walked over, giving me a hug. After that I greeted the other guys. Libitus handed me a drink and I shook Tovex's hand. Plex announced. "Congratulations, John. You're finally getting into the magisterium. Libitus and Rayla had decided to throw you a party, and with you being my apprentice, I naturally agreed. Only after making us foot the bill." I still agreed. Plex shot back at Libitus, making Rayla laugh. "Not important. The point is, tonight we're going to have fun. A company party. And so long as you're not totally drunk in an hour or 2, we've got presents to give to you. Yes, some expensive congratulatory presents." "Shut up, you're rich." Rayla shot back at Plex. Smiling, I raised the glass of wine that Libitus handed me. "Well, thanks everyone. Cheers." "Cheers." We all tipped back our drinks. Then, a night of festivities was kicked off. "Hey, I remember when this kid was new." "Shut up. He was so cocky, I mean, he said he'd take me down with him if he had a hard time with a job. Ha ha ha. Oh God." I covered my face as Rayla laughed her ass off. After an hour or so, we were all tipsy from the high-quality drinks this restaurant served. The food we ordered was also fantastically high class. I stuffed my face with some cubes of meat to distract from the embarrassing memories. Libitus nodded and spoke while chewing. "Yeah, but in his defense, his summons are pretty crazy. 5 months later and he was able to survive even in the trenches. He can kill people far above his level. Well, no thanks to Maxwell. How you managed to land that man as a teacher is beyond me." Plex was flabbergasted while tilting back another drink. I raised my glass to Libitus. "Thanks man. Still stupid for trying to challenge Plex though." "Then I take back my thanks." Ha ha ha. Libitus laughed as I stuck up my middle finger. At that moment, Rayla suddenly clapped. "Oh, we still need to do presents." "Presents." I cheered as Rayla stood and went to a corner of the room. There, she grabbed a couple boxes. One was big, and one was small. "Open the big one first." Libitus smiled as Rayla handed the big box to me. I grabbed it from her, feeling a bit of weight. "This is from all of us and Maxwell." "Maxwell?" "Yes. I'm pretty sure he pitched in the most out of us all." "Heh, not that he isn't wiping his ass with gold paper." Plex chuckled as I opened the box. Inside, I could see a piece of clothing. But not just any ordinary clothing. I took out the item, unfurling it and finding that it was a coat, not unlike the one I had bought a while ago. Except, although it was a black long coat, it had purple lines branching from the spine outward toward the edges. They occasionally pulsed, like veins connected to a beating heart. "It's a coat made from the pelt of a hybrid mind beast." These hybrids are basically a combination of two branches of magi. This one is both a summoner and knight. They're rare, and even harder to kill. Not only that, but this pelt is made from the most expensive part of their body, the spinal column. Basically, it's fucking expensive, and if you die while wearing that, you'll be the biggest joke of the kingdom. Plex summed up, causing Rayla to kick his leg. Don't listen to him. We know that your weakness is defense, so this should make up for a good portion of that. It goes down to your knees, so it even protects most of your legs. Just be careful of what it doesn't protect, like your head and feet. Also, although the coat won't break, the impact can still hurt you. This won't make you invincible. It even has some utility when activated that can help you in battles. Of course. This is more than enough. Thank you, everyone. I'll take care of it. We got it to take care of you, so keep yourself safe. Libidus gave me a warm smile. After that, Rayla handed me the small box. She hastened me to open it. Oh, it's this. I was surprised as I pulled out a bracelet. It was a spatial sack. I had gone and looked for some myself since I was thinking about buying one and knew what they looked like. In fact, the Polaris Bank sold a line of them. This seemed to be one of those. This is a Polaris brand spatial sack. It doesn't have a lot of room, no more than a chest full of worth. But we mainly chose this one for its functionality. With it, you can directly will items into your hand. Its ease of use is worth much more than the potential sheer space. The bracelet also locks to your arm, so it won't be stolen unless someone cuts it off you. That's cool. Thanks you guys. I smiled while slipping it onto my right wrist, same place that my aerial was. The bracelet went a bit higher up the forearm before clamping down comfortably. After that, it seemed to scan my crest before activating with a pulse of blue light. Then I suddenly became aware of the space inside the bracelet. It really was about a chest-sized area, about 4 cubic feet big. So while it couldn't be used to store any significant amount of supplies, it was enough for any small items I needed. For instance, instead of needing to take a recovery pill out of a container within my pocket, I could just make one appear in my hand and pop it into my mouth. With this, I wouldn't need to carry anything on my person, so nothing would get lost or stolen. These two gifts that I was given were valuable, especially the coat. I couldn't imagine how much was spent on it if not just Maxwell, but everyone here pitched in for it. It was a big gift, making me feel really grateful. These were the first friends I had in this world. After leaving behind everything I knew, I suppose that I had been ignoring the homesickness and focusing on making my way here. But now, I wasn't so homesick. Thank you guys, really. Getting slightly emotional, I got up and went around hugging everyone. Plex was the last, and as I stood in front of him, he looked up at me weirdly. You're gonna make me get up? Come on. An apprentice can thank his master with a hug, no? Besides, you gave me this job when I needed it most. Despite everything, I'm still thankful for all you've done for me. Fine. I can have a heart. Standing up, the man accepted the hug with a pat on the back. After that, the party went on for a little while longer before ending a bit before the sun came up. When everyone finally decided to go, it was Libidus who pulled something out of his jacket. Hey, let's all take a picture. With what? This thing I got. The guy who sold it said it would make physical copies. He fumbled around with a magical device that looked similar to my bank card. As he was still a bit drunk, he was less coordinated. But he got it set up and waved everyone over with a smile. We all bundled together, looking into the card with smiles. Wait, what about Tovex? He's passed out. Dumbass. Whatever. Smile. Raising it above us, Libidus activated the device with magic. It flashed, and he brought it down. After that, it divided into 5 cards. One for everybody. As a memory. This is cool. I smiled at the flexible card that now had a picture of the 4 of us. Libidus with a goofy grin, Rayla putting up 2 fingers, Plex barely keeping himself standing with a drunken face. Tovex in the back on the ground and with his ass in the air. I put the picture into my bracelet, feeling fuzzy on the inside. It reminded me of home. Rayla and I were still in the room after everyone had left. I guess they had tacitly decided to give us our own space, as if we were dating. Not that our relationship was that far from it. And when it was just the 2 of us, I finally got to focus on perhaps the greatest thing about this reserved room in this high-class restaurant. One of the walls was completely glass, and since this place was near the center of the city and so high up, it gave a clear view of the surrounding landscape. I could see the morning rays light up the sides of hundreds of buildings around the kingdom's capital. I could even see part of the royal palace in all its marvelous golden glory. It was a breathtaking sight, and I ended up staring at it for a long time. Rayla took a seat with me, staring out the window for a while before reaching over. She placed a small box in my lap. I looked over at her as she smiled. "A personal gift from yours truly." I was silent as I opened the box with care. Inside were a pair of gloves. The gloves that Plex had me wear when I first got here were now worn, torn in some places. But since they were for the purpose of covering my crest, I didn't care much. Besides, worn could have its own charm. Then again, the gloves also helped prevent blisters from wielding all the guns I did. But regardless of all that, this was a personal present from Rayla. I took them out. They were black and fingerless like my current ones. But these seemed to be made of high-quality leather, much better than the others. And on the back of the right hand were 4 letters written in red. Bang. I smiled at the thought, and Rayla seemed a bit embarrassed. I thought, since your summons always explode when you shoot them, it would be fitting. Anyway, the gloves are far better than your current ones. They should be comfortable and have good grip, and the leather shouldn't ever get worn down or tear from normal use. They're great. I spoke after a moment, putting the new gloves on. They really were comfortable, but more than that, they came from a good friend. You know, when I arrived here, I had literally nothing but the clothes on my back. I'll never be able to see my family or friends again, and everything that was ever familiar to me is now gone forever. Rayla was silent, not expecting my sudden confession. I sighed as I looked out the window. As if it already hadn't, the reality of my situation was hitting me hard. I knew nobody. But I was lucky to be caught by Plex and dragged into this business. After that I met Libidus. And then, I met you. I looked over, seeing Rayla hang her head. Then she suddenly leaned over, resting her temple against my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her at the same time. "I'm really glad I met you, Rayla. It's hard to make genuine friends, especially in a new place. So I feel lucky that you happened to be at the company I got dragged into." "Yeah, I guess I'm lucky too." She spoke softly, her blood-red hair brushing against my neck as she settled in deeper. We watched the sun come up, and it was only when I heard her snoring that I figured it was time to go. I picked her up and left the market, taking her to my room in the hotel. It was there that I laid her down in my bed before jumping in myself. It was more than big enough for the two of us, so I was comfortable as I let the warmth of the alcohol take my consciousness away. I woke up unpleasantly to an alarm. Taking a few minutes, I eventually glanced at my eternally closed windows, seeing the high sun of noon. Today was the first day of magisterium entries that I needed to be in the city for. It was also my first day of efforts to flip my sleeping schedule back to normal. That would be hard since the light of day now made me drowsy. Glancing over, I could see Rayla still sound asleep next to me. Her sleeping face was adorable with her hair draped across her lips. Despite supposedly being that much older than me, she only looked to be in her late 20s. But there was no mistaking the mature charm she carried, which made her seem a bit older. She really was a beautiful woman. Being active with this job made her body toned and strong. And as I had discovered during our night together, her scars only made her that much hotter. After staring for longer than I should have, I finally pulled myself out of bed. I cleaned myself up and got dressed. Today was the first day of our auction runs, but since I had school to deal with, I wouldn't be participating. I was probably missing out on a few dozen gold bullion, which made me groan in financial pain. When I was basically prepared to leave, I suddenly remembered the new coat I had received as a gift last night. I operated the similarly new spatial bracelet, letting the coat appear in my grasp. Even lower-end clothing like the one I bought for 80 gold bullion was equipped with all manner of pleasant enhancements like self-cleaning, temperature control, and more. This black coat had all those things and more. But the most obvious part of this item were the purple lines that looked like blood vessels spreading from the spine of the back. I looked at the formations with a clearer head. Down the back from the collar to the tailbone, I could see a long series of thick ridges. It really looked like a spinal column, just like Rayla had described. And from these vertebrae were all these lines that sprouted outward, spreading around to the front of the coat. Perhaps they were more like nerves instead of blood vessels. Either way, all these lines consistently pulsed with the bloom of purple. Until I put it on. When I slipped my arms through the sleeves, I could feel the coat suddenly pulse with a wave of magic. It reminded me of the first time I got hit by magic during my first heavyweight job, a pulse of mana that disrupted my insides. Except this seemed to envelop me with it, scanning my body and conforming the leather to it. Then, I felt something make contact with my mind. It was like I suddenly became aware of a new limb, the coat being the limb. This connection allowed me to see every detail of the coat. I could practically feel it, like it was a second skin. And after a few moments, the magic disappeared, and I found that the spinal column of the coat was now seated along my own spine. It moved with my body yet refused to let go, making it stick like a magnet. This was a good thing, of course. This meant it would stay snug while I moved, not restricting my movements or getting annoying. More than all that, it was incredibly comfortable. While the leather was surprisingly thick, the weight was negligible and the feel against my body was divine. It didn't stick or feel abrasive. I wasn't sure how to describe it, but it felt like how I did in my bed when I woke up under the covers during a cold morning. Another thing I noticed was that after the coat had bonded to my body, the pulsing of those purple lines ceased. They faded into a barely faint purple, no longer active like how it had been. Unless you paid attention to it, it would appear like a normal black coat. I was glad, far more than satisfied with this gift. While the connection it formed was mysterious, I assumed it had to do with those abilities Rayla had told me about. After that, I also threw on my gloves. I smiled when I saw Bang on the back of the right hand. It was cute, even cuter when I thought of how Rayla had asked for it to be put there. Suddenly, I heard Rayla's moan as she shifted in my bed. It wasn't long after that she came strolling out of my room, her clothes a mess and her eyes squinting from drowsiness. "So this is your fancy room, huh?" She spoke and cleared her throat while looking around. This hotel room, as expected from the Black Spider Hotel, was more than luxurious. It had an amazing bathroom, heavenly bed, and high-quality interior. The living room had soft carpets and plush couches along with a few decorations, one of which was a painting of some crazy complicated spell formation. I chuckled a bit. Yeah, it's a bit better than the one at the other hotel I had. It's better than my entire apartment. Speaking of, why haven't you moved into something like a house? What do you think I'm saving up for? She smirked at me while walking into the kitchen, grabbing a glass and filling it with water. She spoke after taking a sip. Houses in the city are expensive. I could easily buy a mansion in any other city, but I don't want to leave this place. So I've been saving to get a property on the outskirts, a bit of a distance from the Founders Market. And yet you pitched in how much to get me this coat? I raised my brow at her. I really was curious as to how much they spent on me, since I was now planning on paying it back in some way. She snickered at me. Nice try, John. It was a gift, so you have no choice but to accept it. Besides, we actually don't know how much that coat cost. It was Maxwell who put in the order, and we're sure he paid a lot more than the combination of what we put into it. But as Plex said, it's not like the man isn't wiping his ass with gold paper. Still, you should be thanking him. I would, but I actually haven't seen him lately. I scratched my head. Ever since a few days ago, Maxwell had disappeared from the Polaris headquarters. I hadn't been to a class in around a week due to that. Rayla changed the subject. You're going to the magisterium, right? Yeah, although the entrance day is tomorrow, Maxwell told me to come a day early to get things sorted. Yes, especially for you since you're already Authority 3. As a forewarning, your summons will be tested and you'll be questioned. They'll probably ask you things about where you got the spell formations, so have an answer prepared. And, the Polaris family is not really an answer, nor is Maxwell. I would just say that you're coming from a magic school in another city. Oh, all right. I nodded at the valid explanation. It wasn't like I had anything else. Rayla nodded. Yeah, say that you're from the Magic Academy of Halesburg. I've heard of people who have used that excuse. Sure. Thanks. Of course. Think of it as payment for letting me use your room a bit longer. It is way too early and I need my beauty sleep. Oh, this coat looks good on you too. She walked over, straightening out my collar. Then, she leaned in and gave me a hug. Have fun. You know I'm not leaving forever, right? The magisterium is close, so I'll still be trying to work. You know I'm not leaving forever, right? The magisterium is close, so I'll still be trying to work. Yes, but not nearly as much as you were. You'll be lucky to have free time a couple times a week, especially if you're jumping into the higher ranks. So don't worry about coming in. Just focus on getting stronger. That's what will make you the big money. We separated, after which she walked by me and smacked my ass. Now get going, sweet cheeks. The magisterium doesn't work at night like the black market. Heh, all right. With a laugh, I finally left the room, letting Rayla have her way with it. Making my way down, I saw the key master at the clerk counter, as always. I questioned. Do you ever sleep? Oh, John. Good afternoon, and no, I don't sleep. A full-time job requires full-time attention. Sheesh. I hope they're making you rich with all this work. Are the benefits at least good? I would say so. He smiled at me charmingly. Off to the magisterium? I am. That reminds me. You said I would get a room until I entered. Well, that time has come. Indeed. But don't fret. The magisterium will naturally provide you with residence, so you will no longer need my assistance. Although, I can't say that the stay there will be quite as pleasant. Well, of course not. I won't have the hospitality of the key master. Haha, you flatter me. The man chuckled, and I put out my hand. Thank you for everything, key master. Really? You've made my life much more bearable with your assistance. Hopefully one day I can pay everything back. The key master was silent as he looked at my hand for a few moments. Then, as if pushing past hesitation, he reached out and shook it. Our gloved hands clasped as we both smiled. It is my pleasure, John Cooper. Oh, and take this. Retracting his hand, he suddenly went digging through his coat. Then, he took out a gold key. This was a step above the silver key I was given when taking residence. I grabbed it as he spoke. Please, come back anytime you need, John. Your room will remain as it has been. Ah, key master, you're making me feel like a leech. Well, I had also been thinking of what I can do, so here. Suddenly I summoned 6 bullets. Unlike normal spirits like guns and such, these bullets could be summoned and kept permanently in the real world since they were consumable. I placed the bullets on his desk, with slight embarrassment. Anything you need me to do, key master, you just tell me and I'll do it. Of course, I'm not strong enough to do anything significant now, but give me time and I'm sure you'll have a valuable asset to help you when you want it. 6 bullets for 6 promises. I see. Very well. I will accept your promise. 6 bullets for 6 promises. Thank you. No, thank you. And have a nice day, John. With that exchange, I finally left the hotel. My destination was the Magisterium, the most prestigious magic college in the kingdom. The Magisterium. It was the second largest property besides the royal palace. It was a college with dozens of buildings and even more facilities where all manner of upcoming magi learned to grow and wield their powers. It was the sole factory that pumped out competent magical soldiers to fight against the scourge. They also supposedly had a monopoly on the spell formations that cultivated authorities, but that was less so for the lower-level authorities. Tradition dictated that those with crests were activated at around the age of 16. Then they would go on to receive a few years of magical education before hopefully reaching authority 4 or 5 and be released into the military around the age of 19 or 20. Basically, I was way past the ordinary age. Even as I stood in front of the gates, I could see plenty of teens with bright faces practically skipping onto the grounds. It was this place that was pulling me from my work in the markets. I felt it was good to start something new, but something in me also wanted to stay where I was. After all, I had been making something of myself. I had renown. With a sigh, I strolled onto the grounds. Since it was the middle of summer, I could feel the heat bear down from above, a foreign feeling since I had worked in the cool night for 5 months. But my new coat kept my temperature just right. I didn't sweat even though it had to be at least 90 degrees out. As I walked onto the grounds though, I suddenly heard a ring in my head. I lifted my aerial. I see you. Stay there. It was Maxwell's voice, something I hadn't heard in almost a week. A minute or so later, I saw him walk over to me. He was dressed in his luxurious navy blue robes accentuated with gold and a few jewels, clearly displaying his rich disposition. His sharp face eyed me before nodding. The coat fits you well. A worthwhile purchase. I hear I have you to thank for it. So thank you, Maxwell. I hope I can pay you back. That would take a while. Don't worry about it and follow me. He waved, and I followed with a smile. He led me onto the grounds where we entered one of the first buildings within the central plaza. An administration building. Bypassing the clerk, we found an elevator and rose a few floors before stopping at an office. He entered, greeting a man. Berman. This is John, the one I was telling you about. Maxwell brought me forward as I observed this Berman. He was a stout man with a thick beard and glasses. Besides the robes, he looked like a normal office man. But within his body I could sense a thick aura of power, one I only recognized in knights. It seemed he was really strong, at least an authority 8 like Rayla. He nodded to me. So you're the student. Definitely different from the ordinary students we get every year. He's already faced plenty of adversity, and is an authority 3. I'd like to directly place him within the 4th year class, particularly the elites. Ha! That's too much, Maxwell. The fourth-year class I can do. But he'll have to earn a place in the elites naturally. Well, at least his age won't raise any questions. Though, his authority is a bit low. His power makes up for it. Just get him in the fourth year. Sure, sure. With that, Berman retrieved a few sheets of paper and started writing. As he did, he stuck his hand out. ID. Oh, here. Pulling out my card, I tilted it and retrieved my citizenship ID that I received a long while ago. However, the sight of my platinum card made Behrman's eyes bulge a little as he took my ID. Heh, you're something else, huh? I guess Maxwell isn't totally out of his mind. He shook his head while planting the ID against the papers, copying it in some magical way. He then stamped my ID card, marking it, before doing the same on the papers. With that, he was finished. Maxwell took one sheet while Berman kept the rest. There, that's the entry form. He's been given residence and the classes you asked for. His ID is also that of a fourth year's. No questions will be asked about his authority, but his power still needs to be tested. So go ahead and head to the grounds. Just show them that paper. Sure. Thank you, Berman. It's nothing. At least I got to see something interesting. He smirked at me while I was dragged out by Maxwell. Then, I was taken past the plaza and onto some training grounds. They were large fields of what seemed like soft stone. There were also plenty of kids already getting tested, including a line. Maxwell sighed and pointed. Just go wait in line and show them this paper when you need to. All right. And should I be showing off everything? No. You have multiple weapons, so just take out one and use it. Don't worry about looking good. Just get your power logged and finish. Okay. With that, I stepped into the line. I was surrounded by young kids, some as young as the minimum age of 16. The oldest one I saw might have been 18. I was 22, and while I wasn't much older, I felt far older. Hell, I felt years older than when I had first come to this world. The black market had changed me greatly. I waited in line for a while as Maxwell stood to the side lazily. When it was close to my turn, a kid nearby suddenly spoke. I like your coat. I turned, seeing a boy who looked to be around 17 or 18. He seemed extroverted, so I just nodded. Thanks. You look pretty powerful. Heh, I'm already authority too. My family had the spell formations for it. Is that right? What family? I'm not sure you'd know. Try me. I casually went along as his voice turned low. But I didn't expect the answer. They're kind of hidden. We're called the Tavera family. Oh? I see. You know about us? So you've been to the black market? Something like that. I chuckled at the coincidence. At the same time, it was my turn. I waved to the boy. Tell your patriarch that John said hello. Patriarch. He seemed a bit baffled as I stepped toward a man behind a desk. I handed him the papers. What type of magus? Summoner. HM. And what type of summoner? Cold. He seemed disappointed, perhaps a bit pitying, as he pointed. Go up to the target dummies and utilize your power against them. You have 1 minute to attack the dummy. All right. With that, I moved over. There were a dozen target dummies that looked metal, so I casually picked one. In my hand appeared a revolver. Specifically, it was the Colt Peacemaker, one of the most famous revolvers that symbolized the American West, chambered in .45 Colt. In the past, when I had communed with this gun, I had received the memories of an outlaw who was a particularly good shot. He wasn't known for his quick draws, but he made up for it with sheer accuracy, especially when riding a horse. I had gained his skills that I found to be fitting since I was usually running away from something in the trenches. I could wield this Peacemaker like a pro. Spinning it in my hand, I silently took aim at one of the dummies. My time had started. I pulled back the hammer, and fired. Bang! An explosion rang out, startling everyone around me. Looking past the gun, I saw my bullet hit the dummy in the head, yet off to the side a bit. Not quite a perfect shot, but still a killing blow. Since I had 5 more bullets, I let them loose. Bang 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 bang. 1 more to the head and 3 to the chest. After that, I started ejecting cartridges and replacing them with new ones. Once it was fully loaded, I decided to have fun and taped down the trigger while fanning the hammer. Bang bang bang. Shots went out in rapid succession, smoke rising from the barrel of my gun. After the last round, I found that most of my shots hit center mass. Only one had grazed the side of its body. All my bullets left deep depressions on the dummy. It seemed to be normal iron or the like. I clicked my tongue. Decent accuracy. I'll take it. With that, I let the revolver return to the dimension, walking back to the clerk. Is that all? Yes. Wait a moment. Hurriedly writing things down on the paper, he seemed to describe my ability in detail. And he got many things right. I wielded a weapon that fired small projectiles at high speeds. And I could fire 6 projectiles before reloading each projectile individually into the weapon. At the end, he rated my power as exceptionally lethal, but containing no supportive or defensive utility. With that, he handed my sheet back to me. I walked over to Maxwell with it. He nodded. Very well. We have skipped most of the troublesome work. You will receive all your academic materials during your first day, so for now, we must settle you into your new residence. Come. He waved me along. Leaving the training grounds, we entered deeper into the college. The place we arrived was the residential building for all fourth-year students. It was smaller but more luxurious than the buildings for any of the other years. It was basically 2 massive mansions squished together. On the inside, there were plenty of rooms that resembled small suites. All of these students were well cared for. On the way in I only saw a few other students. They all seemed to be around my age, perhaps with a year of difference. I was observed with curiosity when I walked to my new room with Maxwell. It was when we arrived at the top floor that he finally stopped. Here. Room 312. This shall be your home for the next year at minimum. He unlocked it with a key and beckoned me in. I strolled through the doorway and saw the moderately luxurious interior. It wasn't anything compared to my room at the hotel, but I would still be comfortable here. I bobbed my head. All right. Is there any more business to take care of? I took care of everything already. I have assigned your classes and arranged your cultivation materials. You will receive everything tomorrow. Remember, you now begin in the morning, not end. Yeah, I'm already working on my sleep schedule. Good. A letter will be delivered to you tomorrow morning containing directions for the day. And remember, you will still be having lessons with me. 3 days a week to start. There is still much to teach you before you inevitably leave. Oh. I sighed. It seemed like I would still be forking out money for him. Not that I didn't have more than enough to last me a while. Also, your bill has gone up to 10 gold bullion a week. Since I'll be teaching more core material. What? With that bombshell, the man finally took his leave. I was left groaning in financial pain. Oh God. Why is there a delivery here? A younger kid was skittish as he ventured deep into the academy grounds. It was a place only the elites of the magisterium would normally go, a place that he had no right being near. The Year 4 residences. It was a legendary place that everyone sought to rise toward, to be placed in. To be there was an honor that earned you renown for years to come. All the great legends of the school were located here. He was only supposed to be delivering first-day letters to all the new freshmen. It was supposed to be a simple and easy job. But then, he found one letter that was addressed to room 312 of the Year 4 residence. At first he thought it was a great opportunity to sneak a peek at the place. Everyone dreamed of going over there, so he quickly took the letter and rushed over. But the closer he got, the more the pressure mounted. Just walking through the Year 3 residential area was nerve-wracking enough. Those guys were psychos that fought tooth and nail to rise higher. He felt like he would be challenged if he so much as looked at someone. And the silence of the Year 4 area only made it worse. He looked at the entrance to the building. It was luxurious, fitted with gold and artistic pillars that symbolized greatness. And on the inside, he saw the hall walls that were lined of portraits of those legendary names who had come and gone with great prestige. There were even weapons, all of them giving off daunting auras. The young man didn't want to be there, even if it were a chance of a lifetime. But he trudged through, taking the elevator to the top floor. This is the 4th-year residence. So why are one of these letters going here? He muttered while searching. And looking at the golden numbers on each door, he found himself going the right way. But then, he turned a corner and was startled. A large man stood before him, one whose gaze made him shake in anxiety. He was tall, a long sword on his back that radiated the light of glory and ferocity. This young man, like all others who were fans of those renowned figures at the top of the rankings, knew who it was. But he didn't so much as make a peep when the man took the letter from his hand, glancing at it curiously. So I was right. Some newbie managed to sneak his way to the top. I'll take care of this. With that, he turned and slowly walked off with heavy steps. The young man stared until he disappeared. Finally, he caught his breath and turned, running out of the residence. That was the Severing Blade, Raven. I just met the rank 20 elite. And lived. Knock knock. Ugh. After waking up to banging on the door, I sat up groggily. I was not handling this sleep schedule change well. Knock knock. 2 seconds. Damn! I shouted to the impatient person at the door. Wiping my eyes, I sighed and walked over in nothing but a pair of loose pants. Yes? I opened the door and looked through with squinted eyes. But the sight wasn't one I was expecting. A man, perhaps as tall as I was, stood across from me with a large sword on his back. At first glance he gave off the feeling of a knight, so my guard instinctually went up. He looked me over with silence. During that time, I started to realize that he was rather powerful. At the least, he was on another level compared to those psychos in the trenches. I asked. Seems the delivery boys here are rather amazing. Excuse me? His masculine voice came out, seemingly not pleased by my remark. I just nodded toward the letter in his hand. That is for me, isn't it? He hummed before handing it to me. Then, I shut the door. Thanks. Thud. He stopped the door with his hand, pushing it back open with strength I couldn't resist. After all, he was a knight. No matter how fit or strong I got, knights would always surpass me. I could only contend with low-level ones, and higher-level ones forced me to keep a distance. I frowned. If there's nothing else, please take your leave. Otherwise I'll be removing your hand from my door personally. Heh, at least you've got balls. What's your name? He leaned forward threateningly, making me wary. None of your concern, otherwise you'd know it. Now get your face out of my doorway before I tear you a third eye socket. Click. My revolver appeared, the barrel rising to his eye level. This caused him to smile. A cold summoner. How underwhelming. I'll be speaking with whoever decided that throwing you into our residence was a good idea. Go ahead, dipshit. So long as you stop interrupting my morning. Bang. I slammed the door as he finally backed away. I then heard his footsteps grow distant. My guard went down as I took a deep breath. Sheesh. I am not a morning person. After that, I cleaned myself up and got dressed. I opened the letter as I walked out of my room. It was the day of the opening ceremony for the magisterium. Let's go. I'm coming. We gotta get good seats. As I walked to the magisterium's massive stadium, I could hear hundreds of students running past me with excited faces. The whole thing caused me to smile. This was basically high school for all these kids, so I could understand their happiness. The stadium was basically a huge coliseum. It had one massive field that was bigger than a football field and was surrounded by rows and rows of stairs and seats. The place could easily fit tens of thousands, more than enough for the entire school and then some. I entered and found that they divided the seating by year. Walking up, I was planning to follow the very few fourth-year students in when suddenly I was stopped. ID please. You didn't ask for theirs. I pointed to the other fourth-year students who were walking through. They just waltzed right in. He smiled wryly. Sorry sir, I recognize them, but not you. I need to check. Fine. Here. I retrieved my ID, which he took and saw a big number 4 on. He handed it back with a slight bow. Sorry about that. Please, go ahead. I hummed while walking past. Then, I entered a reserved section for all the fourth years. Before I sat down, I glanced over. I could only see about 40 students here. Without a doubt, they were all powerful, at least in authority or so higher than myself. But there were so few. Compared to the freshman seating that was already jam-packed, each person was basically taking their own row, if not grouped up in small cliques. I was pretty casual as I found myself a seat, but I still couldn't help but notice the not-so-few stares. Nobody in this school knew who I was, and I suddenly jumped into the fourth-year class. It would naturally raise questions, and some might not take kindly to it like that one guy who disturbed my already unpleasant morning. But I couldn't think that much about it. I was really just here to cultivate higher power and train myself against monsters instead of humans. And now, a performance from the College of Enchanted Arts. An announcement was suddenly made as a few dozen people walked into the middle of the field. They seemed like a big marching band, or perhaps an orchestra. Either way, they had many instruments and dancers. It wasn't long before I heard music, and the dancers began going through their routine. There were lights that lit up with waves of their hands and feet, and the music reached my ears rather pleasantly, both upbeat and soothing. But I wasn't too impressed. I had seen too many of these displays during the auction days in the Black Spider Market. And those people had such amazing skills, easily dwarfing these newbies. Still, I enjoyed the entertainment that all the freshmen were going nuts over. It lasted quite a while, but when it finally ended, a figure of authority stepped out along with waves of applause. Allow me to introduce myself. His voice reverberated through the air. It was deep, but more than that, it carried actual power. His words commanded attention and respect. I am Yatra Carrion, the President of the Magisterium and Duke of the Kingdom of Dragon Tongue. I welcome everyone to this most prestigious institution. Everyone went dead silent as he spoke. You could practically see the tangible reverence coming off those students in the other stands. Truly, he was a great man who stood at the pinnacle of this kingdom. And not just socially. To rise in this world, power was everything. This duke was only below the king, and that meant he held power that was capable of dominating damn near the entire world of magi. He was at least authority 10, if not 11. And although authority 10 was only 2 levels away from authority 8 where Rayla stood, truly, the difference was insurmountable, not to mention authority 11. It was said that authority 12 was the highest peak of power. I wondered if the king was at that godlike level. Yatra went on to speak about the magisterium and its great purpose. He spoke of the evil scourge and how we were the greatest hope of humanity to put an end to that extinction-level threat. This place was not only an institution to cultivate powerful magi, but to encourage competition and growth through adversity. Through fighting monsters and sparring with our fellow magi, we would learn how to better our skills and spells until all of us could become a force that turned the tide of the everlasting war. It was all motivational and inspiring, which was nice, but I couldn't help but see the darker side of it. These magi were all better than the ordinary human, but in the end, anybody below the top were still merely soldiers. They were more like really effective cannon fodder rather than some special elite force. But unfortunately, in this world where there was an unending war with an enemy that seemed impossible to kill, the reality could be nothing but dark. I sighed as Yatra finished his speech. Now, I will allow your council president to take the stage. Once again, welcome to the magisterium. For honor. For honor. For honor. The stadium chanted the mantra of the kingdom with Yatra. Then the council president took the stand. Good morning everybody. My name is Tally. Oh geez. Getting to this point, I groaned and tuned out. The girl up at the podium was an overly enthusiastic third year who spoke of nothing but high hopes and sugar-coated expectations. She was like some kind of mascot. And sure enough, I saw plenty of the fourth years get up and walk out. I decided I would join them, leaving the stadium before everyone else. Besides, I had things to do. Heading to the library, I picked up a few books from a nice clerk lady. After that I went to the resource distribution center where I received the spell formation and cultivation crystal that would allow me to cultivate my fourth authority. Simply by joining the magisterium, I was allowed to rise to the next level. Then again, what was authority 4 to these people? I could imagine what would be asked of people in order to receive the spell formations for higher authorities. No doubt, most of it came in the form of military service or merits. Alongside these items came my class schedule. There was a class for cultivation, but that was only one of many I was assigned. Scourge analysis, geography, emergency medical proficiency. These 3 classes would take up most of my day, along with daily cultivation. But there was one that I looked forward to. Applied hunting. I muttered curiously at the description for this class. Basically, every other month there would be a 2 or 3 week long period where the entire class would go out on a field trip and hunt. This could include beast hunting in a controlled forest reserve, or hunting the scourge alongside the military. This controlled hunting allowed all us magi to put our powers to the live test. After all, practicality meant everything. Theory meant nothing if it couldn't deliver on the battlefield. There would be nothing the first month of school, and come the second month, they would be throwing us out there for a whole 2 weeks. It seemed I would have time to get my bearings before getting thrown into the deep end. On my class list were the times for each class. Tapping my aerial, I checked the time and decided to make my way. Scourge analysis was the first class of the day. It was a class that taught everything regarding the scourge. Monsters, materials, weak points, tendencies, geographical habitats, and counter tactics. Normally, someone in the fourth year wouldn't be taking this class. Having gone through several years, they had already learned everything they needed to. But since this was my first year, I had none of those basics, which was why I was thrown into the freshman class. I had to admit, it was a bit embarrassing. When class started, I was surrounded by nothing but young teens. I was severely out of place, wondering if I would be able to get away with teaching myself. It was no different for the class after that. Geography wasn't the normal geography class that I had thought it would be. One could say it was an analysis of the macro-scale movements and shifts in the Scourge's activity. It analyzed the territory that they had conquered and the areas that were currently war zones. Though, there was also some geographical study, primarily teaching major landmarks around the world that we would need to know. Still, it was hard to focus when a bunch of teens were glancing at me constantly. I chose a back seat, but even the kid next to me was constantly stealing glances. I bared with it. I knew I would probably end up out there fighting the Scourge, so this was knowledge I needed to know. I had fought people up until now, not monsters. The two were radically different, even though I didn't have the experience to determine such. I basically likened it to the difference between two boxers fighting each other and a boxer fighting a bear. The same tactics naturally couldn't be used. And many of the things they talked about, even on the first day, surprised me. The Scourge, according to public sources, was made out to be nothing but a mass of horrific monsters that sought the destruction of the world. We were pretty evenly matched with them in sheer power, but while we had the advantage in personal power, they had the advantage in numbers. But there were some special entities that posed the greatest threat. After all, nobody cared about the cannon fodder. There were two types of Scourge creatures that were most concerning. First, the ones who gained intelligence with power, earning the ability to control the Scourge forces in strategic ways. And second, the humans who were captured and demonized, turning into an inhuman monster that was both intelligent and powerful. The Scourge didn't just destroy, it devoured. And occasionally, the unlucky victims would be demonized and warped into a monster beyond their own will. The most horrific way to die to the Scourge, and one of the darkest realities of the war. It was when I heard about this that I couldn't help but remember Libidus' words from that night at the auction house. They seriously loved each other. I mean, she almost killed herself over it. The Scourge took her man in the worst way possible. Demonization. Was that what happened to Rayla's husband? Not only was he captured by the Scourge, but he was demonized, and then reappeared on the battlefield, confirming his demonization. Was he killed? Or is he still one of those monsters? I was pretty sure he had been killed. If not, there was no way that Rayla would have recovered as much as she had seemed to. She probably would have remained in the military until he was relieved of his monstrous existence. Only his death could allow her to move on, even if only a little. It was a mind-numbing thought to have. I couldn't fathom that kind of grief, to know that the person you loved with your heart and soul had been warped into that kind of monstrosity. And to have to kill him even after that. I suddenly felt a wave of sorrow for Rayla. I almost wanted to call her up the instant I inferred these things, but it wasn't like I could explain that I knew about her husband. Libidus had gone behind her back to tell me that before she did. Shit. I cursed under my breath in the middle of class, earning a few glances. Now my mood was ruined, and I had a new irreversible hatred for the Scourge. If they were simply an enemy, then I could sympathize since there were always two sides to a war. But this monstrous entity was nothing but a demonic stain upon the world. Nothing but a parasite that wrought ruin. It seemed I now had another reason to get stronger, other than mere survival. And I was glad that I could wreak my own retribution with the most lethal weapon in two worlds. The first day passed, and I walked to my new on-campus residence with a neutral mood. After learning about nothing but the Scourge, the last class of the day lightened the darkness with a lecture about the body. It was here that I learned that anatomy, or medical science, was just as advanced in this world as on Earth. They knew everything I knew and more. They knew about cells, the components of cells and their functions, along with all the myriads of biological functions that riddled our impossibly complex bodies. Not only that, but they had learned about how the magical forces of this world interacted with the body. Of course, that stuff only appeared in the more advanced classes. I had expected a primitive or vague detailing on the body and medical care, but I found quite the opposite. In fact, this class of mine was looking to be more of a paramedic course than otherwise. We would learn not just about the body, but all about the types of medical care. They would teach us how to similarly respond to various injuries, making us EMTs in training. This also seemed to be the most difficult class in the magisterium, obviously because of how complex it was and how much there was to memorize. But when all of these people were going to be specialists on the battlefield, it was rather important that they at least knew some stuff. I was similarly in distress during the class. I wasn't cut out for memorizing all that information, a reason I never even fathomed becoming a doctor. Too much to learn. But I found myself keeping up, especially in my other courses. And I knew why. Psyche, the power of the mind. Summoners, although generally known for being weak, were also known for one other thing. Being the smartest people in the kingdom. With minds that became sharper, faster, and stronger with every authority they gained, summoners received many boosts to their cognitive abilities. They were the most successful in academics, even beyond warlocks who studied magic spells. This would naturally help immensely in regard to my classes. I almost looked forward to it. Beyond that though, I only had one thing to focus on. Cultivating my authority was my most important task. With a greater authority, I could unlock bigger and badder guns. Those would secure my survival, especially since I was sure my first hunting trip wouldn't be an easy one. I was hoping that I could advance in a month, like I had been, but upon opening the book to see the formations I needed to use, I couldn't help but lose a bit of hope. This is absurd. What am I looking at? A circuit board. The book was filled with all these impossibly complex lines and symbols. It was hard to even look at, let alone use. It seemed authority 4 was a rather massive jump. But I had a better mind. I knew I couldn't be held up for long by this complexity, so I dedicated at least a few hours to studying the formations. Besides, I found it oddly enjoyable. Studying the formations wasn't as simple as tracing the lines in your mind. If it were that easy, everyone would be able to advance. No, it was what the lines and symbols represented that halted people's progress. The formations were a guide. By trying to mimic them, people would come to understand the formation within the magical realm and learn how to use it in order to cultivate greater power. It was like learning a language, and whenever I studied the formation, I would slowly gain understandings. It was like a bar that slowly filled up with progress, as if I were downloading information into my mind from the file that was the formation. And the feelings of progress were nice, even if tiring. But I quickly figured out that it would take much more time for me to so much as decipher the formation, let alone cultivate the power. A month wouldn't be enough. But up until now I had been cultivating every day, so I had gotten used to the slow but steady progression. So I stuck around in my room, waiting for the end of the day where I would go to bed early and catch up on sleep. Another day came around, and I wasn't disturbed like the first. All was normal, except for the fact that I was completely wrong about the schedule regarding our hunting trips. The fourth years had things a bit different, and what I had heard about only applied to those in the earlier years. Turns out, the hunting trips would be 1 month on and 1 month off. That meant that, at the end of the month, I would leave for an entire month on this trip. And I wasn't simply going to a forest inhabited by monsters. No, I would be joining a special military unit that specialized in small-scale scourge hunts. This was all to say that I was being thrown straight into the deep end, and much earlier than I anticipated. All this information came to me when I arrived back home from classes, seeing that a delivery had been delivered by Maxwell. A letter detailed the aforementioned information and also came with an interesting surprise. The primary focus of his letter, and the package that came with it, was regarding the white crystal. The church pioneered the first and best way to purify black crystals infected with the scourge's poison, creating white crystals. These crystals could be used in magical devices or used for cultivating authorities. But the magisterium, or the kingdom, didn't use the white crystals of the church. In order to combat the church's monopoly on the crystals, they developed their own method, an inferior one. It purified most, but not all, of the scourge's poison. This created purity grades for the crystals and introduced problems that came with cultivating with them. It was no different from cultivating with poison. The energy given to you was impure, and methods had also been created to purify the energy inside of you after the cultivation was donor. Basically, the kingdom created a problem and its solution all in an attempt to economically fight the church. While it was a natural course of action for two massive organizations, it was still a shitty situation for those who were forced to use the tainted crystals. All those at the magisterium and the kingdom's military were those victims. Of course, many went and got their hands on the church's white crystals anyway, and thankfully, Maxwell was making himself out to be one of my avenues. Inside the package I received was a white crystal a grade above the previous one I used. Maxwell said that, due to the nature of my call, I couldn't cultivate with the impure crystals at all. My call would reject any form of impurity, so I was forced to use white crystals. Not that I had an issue with this. And with the white crystal was another set of advancement formations that he told me to use instead of the standard ones. They were even more complex, and he didn't explain why, but since I was already going along with his guidance, I couldn't stop here. Thanking him inwardly for the help, I threw the crystal into my spatial bracelet. I simultaneously stashed the other crystal away. I wouldn't need it anymore, not that I could begin cultivating immediately. Beyond that, there was only one other piece of information that I paid attention to. Everyone at the magisterium was placed into combat classes. These classes taught knights martial arts, taught warlocks how to use their spells in various situations, and taught summoners how to effectively utilize their summons. But I wasn't placed into any combat classes, or at least, not on paper. Apparently Maxwell had arranged something else for me. It was something like a club. The place was basically a training ground. Due to the unique nature of my summons, I couldn't go fighting anybody for fear of outright killing them. Guns were kind of an all-or-nothing weapon. So he put me into this club that I would report to when classes were over. So the next day, after going through all my classes, I went around to a certain building number located in an obscure corner of the campus. Only, it wasn't a building that I came to. It was a gate with the number across its signboard. I walked through, seeing a small building to the side. I went and knocked on the door, waiting several seconds before it opened. "HM? Who are you?" The man who greeted me was a rough one. He was old, his eyes sharp and scrutinizing, and the wrinkles on his face scrunching in a perpetual frown. But he was dressed in rather luxurious clothing. I recognized its quality, even though it wasn't an extravagant robe like what Maxwell wore. In the black market where nice things were everywhere and also exorbitantly expensive, I had developed a good eye for something's quality. I greeted back casually. "Hi, I'm John. I was told to report here after classes." "Oh, you're Maxwell's apprentice. Come in then. I'll explain everything." I walked in with his beckon, closing the door behind me. I found that this small room was completely dark except for the dozen screens that covered the front wall. Each one displayed a different video feed, some of them displaying two. In each feed was a person. I saw some knights, several warlocks, and only a few summoners. They were all fighting, and their opponents weren't each other, but what looked like robots. Of course, they couldn't be mechanical robots. I saw all these magical designs on their bodies, ones that glowed whenever their monstrous bodies moved just like beasts. This is the Magisterium's finest training ground. Not everybody comes to know about this place's existence, and even fewer actually get to use it. Only the elites can come here freely, but you've been made something of an exception. You can thank Maxwell for that, but there is a condition. The man eyed me. "You can use this place for the next month until you go on your next excursion, but if you don't produce satisfactory results while on that trip, then you won't be allowed back. Now, allow me to explain what you do here." He pointed to the screens. Every day, I set up a different scenario using the battle puppets. These scenarios are designed to mimic scourge battles. From hive raids to frontal mass battles, I can reproduce any kind of scenario imaginable. And you will be faced with those scenarios. The difficulty level varies, and sometimes I set up scenarios where you work in teams. Regardless, this is the place to train you in true practical combat, second only to fighting actual battles with the scourge. With your lack of experience, this is a holy place for you, so cherish this next month wisely. And since the scenario has only started recently, you can still join in. Here. The old man handed me a necklace. It was flat and made of thick black metal. When I put it on, it sat snugly against my skin, using magic to adhere to my body without moving or disturbing me. That's a safety band. It'll keep you alive, but be warned, you can still be injured, and heavily at that if you're stupid. Not only will you learn to kill here, but you'll learn how to estimate an enemy's power level and how to respond. Now, the scenario today is a basic one, some jungle hunting. There are monsters and humanoid puppets all throughout that forest landscape. Your sightlines are limited, so your ears will be your best ally. How you approach battles is up to you. Either way, your goal is to fight on the leaderboard against the others. Tap the jewel on your band. Following his directions, my finger found the protruding jewel on the necklace, tapping it once and seeing a screen appear in front of me. It was a leaderboard containing a dozen or so names. Every participant was on there, and it showed a point score beside their name. It was no different from a game, making me smile a bit. Wave away the screen and it'll go down. And when you're ready, you can step through the portal outside. It'll drop you in a random spot in the forest at least 100 meters away from an enemy. And if you decide that you're done with training, tap the jewel on your band and say "I quit." That'll bring you back out here. Now go on. I look forward to what Maxwell's apprentice has up his sleeve. He waved me away, and I took one more glance at the screens before leaving. There was a portal on the side of the building. So after summoning a lever-action rifle, I headed through it. I really was thrown right in the middle of a jungle. My reappearance came with a small wave of disorientation. I quickly focused though and took a look around me. The jungle was still bright, but the ground was covered in mud, bushes, vines, and tree roots. It was complex terrain, and fighting here could obviously be dangerous. So I decided that I needed to keep my enemies at a distance, and if they found me, then I would try and take them in a head-on manner. My shotgun should take care of anything that got too close for comfort. My coat also gave me a source of comfort. It undoubtedly had extraordinary defensive abilities, and Rayla had told me that it came with some other special abilities. Unfortunately, I wasn't told how to activate it, so I would either have to ask later or figure it out myself. With my reassurances, I started slowly walking through the jungle. I kept my head on a swivel, constantly surveying my surroundings and waiting, until I heard a faint brush of some leaves in the distance, making my head instinctively snap over. My hearing and instincts had become refined after many weeks in the trenches. I could pick up on even faint footsteps, as I had been subject to no small amount of ambushes. So my hands moved instinctively, my body lowering and my eyes taking aim across the sights of my gun. At the end of my barrel, I could see a monster. It wasn't an animal, but one of the puppets that was shaped like one. It was an agile creature, looking closer to a tiger than anything else. It didn't seem to have seen me yet, so I kneeled down and steadied my barrel. This would serve as good aim training as well. I was already glad Maxwell had got me into this place. With those thoughts, I centered my sights. And I didn't hesitate in pulling the trigger. Bang! The sound shook the jungle, and in the distance, I could see the monster drop to the floor, dead. In my vision, I could see the number 100 pop up, the points I earned for the kill. Smiling, I got up and started running. Letting off shots attracted everything's attention toward me. It was the fatal flaw of my guns. I couldn't be quiet with them. But I could mitigate the downsides by changing positions. Even if I ran into enemies while relocating, it was better than being swarmed from all sides. And as expected, it wasn't long before I encountered another puppet. Except this beast was bigger, like a bear. It found me and charged. I stopped and raised my gun, slowing my breath and firing. Bang! Another shot, and I cleanly hit the bear's skull. But it didn't go down. The beast was dazed for several moments, not dead, but obviously hurt. I took the opportunity to infuse some power into my gun. It glowed with a faintly holy light, as if being blessed. And my next shot was all the bear could take. Its head exploded with the empowered bullet, dropping to the floor. Dropped like a drunk stripper. All right, let's get out of here. I found another direction and took off after smiling at the 400 points I got. After not encountering anything for a while though, I decided to drop down and hide. Fighting enemies was easy but tiring. If I wanted to spend some time in this training ground, then I would need to space my battles. This is why I found a large bush and settled inside of it. I didn't really care about getting dirty either, since my coat was always comfortable and could clean itself later. From there I watched a few monsters go by at a distance. And when I decided that enough time had passed, I targeted one and took my shot from the bush. Although I didn't have a scope, my aim was still decent enough to hit some shots at around 100 meters. Besides, it wasn't like these puppets were small. Bang! Smoke rose up within the bush as the monster dropped dead. After that, I reloaded some bullets and waited. Naturally, monsters made their way to my general position. And from the bush, I took several out. I had to empower several of my shots. That was the proper term for using my psyche to make my spirits, or my guns, stronger. And with every kill, my points grew. It was only when I had killed 6 that I finally rushed out of my bush, a large group converging on my location. I fought off several monsters while running, killing 4 more and eventually managing to calm the agitation my gunshots had caused. Like that, I repeated a cycle of hiding, killing, running, and hiding again. The forest was big, and there were varying densities of monsters. But I noticed that the further in any direction I went, the stronger the monsters got. But that just meant more points. Besides, not all monsters had tough bodies. Many were of the warlock type, casting their own specialty spells. But those were the easy ones. My killing speed was good. And my routine went well until I encountered another person, not a puppet. Hiding within a foxhole underneath some tree roots and bushes, I spotted a person in my sights not that far away. They seemed to be looking for something, probably me, as I had been causing tons of noise. But I just watched for a while. I tracked them with my sights, my finger brushing the trigger while imagining if I could hit my shots while they were moving. It was a woman, and an agile one at that, as she could scale and hop between trees. She had short brown hair and wielded a sword, obviously a knight. It made me a bit more wary. Nights were my bane. But as I imagined taking my shot, something interesting happened. It was right as I had the thought of pulling the trigger that the girl suddenly jolted and dashed out of the way with inhuman agility. Of course, I wasn't actually planning on taking the shot, but it seemed that she had sensed my intentions. For a moment I thought that something like that should be impossible. How could she possibly read my mind from a distance, or at all for that matter? Especially since she was totally unaware of me. But after dodging a non-existent shot, she suddenly turned toward my general direction. She didn't immediately spot me, but it wasn't long after that I saw her eyes lock onto me through the bushes. I smiled as she crouched aggressively. Then, I rose. I slipped out of the bushes, waving with a smile. Hey there, what's your name? I should be asking you that. I don't recognize you. She narrowed her eyes and straightened her body, feeling less threatened now that I lowered my gun. I shrugged. I'm new here. This is my first day at these training grounds. I'm kind of having fun too. You're the one making all that noise? Guilty as charged. A cold summoner. She had a peculiar look while observing my gun. Even I could sense the type of magus a person was. It was a sixth sense, so she could obviously do the same, especially since she was probably of a higher authority. Then, she looked at my face. You're the new fourth year. You've heard of me? Not anybody can just walk straight into our class. Besides, Raven made a big deal about you. It seems he lost since you're still here. Raven? The Severing Blade, yes. You really are new here. You don't even know the names of the elites. She smirked a bit, and I couldn't help a chuckle. Well, I'm not the best with names. But I'd still like to hear yours. I smiled and approached, putting out my hand. The girl smiled and shook it. Tana. Nice to meet you, Tana. I'm John. Hello, John. You're a noisy one, but since you're here, you must be powerful despite being new. Yes, and I apologize for startling you earlier. I chuckled while remembering how frantically Tana had dodged my imaginary bullet. My words made her tilt her head as we separated hands. Yes, I was actually confused as to why you were so open with your intent. Considering the fact that I have no idea what that is, you can probably imagine that I didn't do it on purpose. Wow. You're really new. She was quite baffled by my ignorance. I couldn't help but sigh at that. Yes, I'm still learning a lot. You didn't learn anything in your combat class? I don't have a combat class. The lethality of my weapons prohibits fighting others. I see. She eyed the rifle in my hands and glanced in the distance at a few puppets I had killed. I hadn't attacked more than a few times, and every target had died. If that wasn't lethal, then what was? I smiled. Care to teach me about this so-called intent? Ho-ho, I'm not exactly here to teach. But I'll make a bet. Shoot. I nodded, and she brought up the leaderboard. Beat me on the leaderboard, and I'll teach you. I seem to have a long ways to go then. You sure do. So let's see if your lethality can earn the tutelage of an elite. Of course, I won't just sit idly either. She spun around and crouched, launching her body into the air and onto a tree branch about 40 meters away. She then looked behind her at me, waving with a snicker. I'm not interested in being a tutor, so you better get going. Heh, playing hard to get, I see. I chuckled as she dashed into the distance. I couldn't fathom the kind of strength or agility her body had to be able to bound dozens of meters with each step. Once she promptly disappeared, I pulled up the leaderboard. My name was sitting nicely at the bottom. And from there, I searched for Tana. I quickly found her name. Out of the 14 people currently in this jungle, she was sitting high and mighty at third place. I had a grand total of 5,300 points, but she had a whopping 64,000. Bullshit. As if I even had a chance. Well, I guess I should at least try. Let's get out of last place first. With that, I sent my gun back to the dimension and started jogging. The deeper I went, the more powerful the monsters, and the more points I got. If I wanted any kind of chance, then I would need to test my wit with those beasts. And I didn't stop for anything, not even the few beasts that ended up in my path. Soon enough, I arrived where I wanted to be. The jungle changed colors, from green plants to bright purple plants. The dirt also changed from brown and black to a deep red. It was a rather jarring change. But this was still the place I wanted to be. The monsters here, as I had found, were significantly stronger. No longer could I kill a night-type beast in a few shots to the head. It took large portions of my psyche and well-placed bullets in order to kill them. And even then, that gave them time to close distance. They were fast, tough, and agile. My aim was stressed, as was my athleticism. Thankfully I had learned a lot in the trenches, being ambushed and attacked by several people at once. That experience allowed me to keep my bearing in the face of a beast that refused to die. And more than that, each beast was worth upwards of 2,000 points. My score on the leaderboard rapidly climbed with each kill. In fact, it only took half an hour to climb to 20,000 points. But in that time, Tana had gained another dozen thousand. It was only a bit slower than me, and even given several hours, I might not be able to catch up. But that was no reason to stop. My foremost purpose in being here was for training. I wasn't simply trying to farm points, as that would defeat the purpose. It would only be a month from now that I would have to go and fight the Scourge alongside a military unit. As confident as I was in my guns, I understood very deeply how inexperienced I was with fighting monsters, and more than that, working with others in a combat situation. My aim wasn't perfect, even if it was good. In a fast-paced and stressful environment, a mistake on my part could kill an ally. Most fighters were knights, and they fought in close combat. As a ranged attacker, I would need to land my shots on target without hitting them. Of course, many of the memories that I received from the spirits of my authorities directly gave me fantastic aim. Especially the more powerful spirits, which contained the experience of skilled soldiers or accomplished gunmen. And those memories didn't simply vanish when I wasn't communing with the spirits. They remained faintly in my mind, and my personal experiences from utilizing those memories stayed with me. I was rapidly learning, increasing my skill at lightning speeds. But it would still take time before I was perfect, and that wasn't to mention how the styles of battle would change as I unlocked other weapons. Self-preservation was also an important issue that I needed to take care of. My greatest weakness was defense and close-quarter combat. So I would need to use this training ground as a place to rectify my shortcomings, at least a little. Thankfully, this purple jungle was the perfect place to do that. I didn't run the risk of dying, but I did risk injury. I hadn't been touched for the most part, but when I entered the purple jungle, that changed. Depending on the monster, I would suffer at the hands of claws or fists. But fortunately for me, every attack was eaten by my coat. And the attacks didn't so much as leave a scratch. I suppose the outer layer of the coat was made of some kind of malleable material, because any blemishes would repair themselves even if it was deformed. Not only that, but I could feel some kind of magic activate whenever I was in distress. It heightened my awareness, giving me what felt like 360 vision. I could see even the plants behind me, and my mind could process things faster. Even my reactions were sped up. It was like the coat facilitated my body's commands, as I could move my arms and legs with far more agility. The response time was almost non-existent, allowing me to dodge things that my body normally couldn't. Those effects faded when the threat was gone, however, and I usually felt rather drained. It took a sizable amount of my psyche, but who cared so long as I could keep myself safe? The jacket was proving to be an extraordinary asset. At some point, I also equipped my air mask, taking it from my spatial bracelet. I was used to fighting with it on, and it provided me with greater stamina. I fought through the purple jungle for a couple hours, and over time my points rose higher and higher. But it never went above Tana's. When I finally made it to 60,000 points, she managed to hit 85,000 points. And when I made it to 85,000 points, she rose to over 100,000 points. Thankfully, I at least wasn't in last place. In fact, I made it to the top 5 with relative ease. But the training didn't last forever. Just as I started to get a little hope, thinking that I might be able to surpass Tana, I heard a ringing from my necklace. Training's over. A second after those words, I felt an unknown power wrap around me. I was promptly teleported out of the training grounds, appeared near the building by the entrance. I wasn't the only one. A quick count told me there were a dozen others. I quickly spotted Tana as well. But we only glanced at each other, because I felt everyone's eyes suddenly land on me. I knew people would be curious since I was a newbie, but their interest seemed to go beyond that. I was the subject of their scrutiny until that old man came back out. He looked at me before speaking. Everyone is free to go except for that one. He meant me as he waved everyone else out. And without much suspense, they all left. Except for Tana, who walked over to me and touched her wrist to mine. My Ariel exchanged contact info with hers. I don't mind teaching you a little. But don't expect a full-blown class. That's good enough for me. Have a good day, Tana. She smiled while leaving. I only turned back around when I heard a scoff. How charming. If not for your complete lack of foundational skills, I'd say you're perfect. Get in here. Waving me along, the old man headed into his little outpost. I saw the same screens as last time, but now, they were all filled with recordings of my fights. Once I closed the door, he plopped down on a seat. Your power is seriously suited for killing. I've never seen a more offensive power before, not from warlocks nor knights. Tana is an authority 5, and you were able to keep up to some extent. Of course, she was nothing but relaxed today, but the fact that you even managed to climb out of last place is nothing short of a damn miracle. He sighed while turning to the screens. But despite how excessively lethal your weapons are, you still don't have many of the techniques you should have. You're still obviously a newbie. For example, he pointed to one screen. On it was a video of my encounter with Tana. Specifically, when she dodged my imaginary bullet. Your intent. You have no control over it, and since you're a ranged fighter, that's a major issue. What is intent anyway? It's your mind's effect on the surroundings. It's literally your intentions that seep into the air all around you. People can pick up on that, and it allows them to read you like a book. And there are techniques, especially for summoners, that allow you to conceal it. I can already tell you that those techniques will be your most important, because otherwise you won't be able to kill anyone stealthily like you did with those puppets. Right. Having understood the wild concept, I began to see how important it was. Intent concealment was something I needed to learn quickly. Also, you need to learn how to solidify your psyche. You waste way too much of it when you infuse your summons with it. Unfortunately, there are very few calls that allow you to do such a thing anyway, and I know Maxwell's call is special. So consult him on it. You'll become more efficient and powerful when you bring it under control. Look. He pointed to another screen, one that showed my gun as it glowed with power. That glow was seen whenever I infused my psyche into a spirit. That glow is a telltale sign of your lack of control. I would estimate that nearly half of your power is wasted in the infusion process, and it only gets worse as you infuse more. But the good news is that you obviously have a bountiful pool of psyche anyway. What makes you say that? I didn't exactly see how my pool of psyche was bigger than normal, but apparently this old man could. He glanced at me. You infused a lot of psyche into your weapons throughout the hours that you were in that jungle. I couldn't estimate it properly, but when looking at the glow of your spirits and how often you killed those high-level puppets, and then considering the fact that you're only at authority 3, I can only conclude that the sheer amount of psyche at your disposal is rather enormous. Granted, your power is entirely offensive in nature, but not everyone can jump several authority levels like you do. That easily puts you on par with the elites in terms of your latent potential. I can see why Maxwell took you under his wing. He seemed to grumble while shutting down all the screens. Alright, now get out of here. Be back tomorrow immediately after your classes. We'll have another scenario going, one that will give you some very valuable experience. I can't have you dying during your hunting trip, after all. Okay. Oh, and what should I call you? I asked, since the old man still hadn't given me his name. He spoke while ushering me out of the room. I'm called the Puppet Master. Alright, Mr. Puppet. I'll see you tomorrow. He narrowed his eyes at me while I left. As I walked back to my room, I did a mild reflection on the past few hours, mainly my talk with Mr. Puppet. Honestly, he was a bit hard to talk to. His sharp eyes and authoritative demeanor didn't leave much room for discussion. I could go back and forth with Maxwell when he taught me his call, but I couldn't do that with this old man. It was a bit stifling, but he still fed me valuable information. My intent and my control over psyche. 2 techniques that I would need to consult Maxwell on. Though, I wondered why I wasn't already taught this stuff. Tapping my aerial, I called my teacher. What is it? His monotone voice echoed in my mind. I responded in a direct fashion. I learned about intent and psyche solidification. Are they things I need to learn techniques for? Yes. Well, do you happen to know any that I could learn? It took a second for me to respond after he gave me such a succinct answer. I heard him hum. Controlling your psyche and solidifying it is something that can only come through practice and dedication. Knights and warlocks spend years constantly honing their control, and there are extremely few who are ever able to solidify their power. So while a technique isn't actually necessary for evolving your control, there is a technique that can help. What? The one you've been practicing this entire time. The one I taught you when you first came to me. My eyes widened a bit. I recalled the technique I used to practice daily. It was nothing more than tracing various complex and redundant formations with my psyche, and it was horribly tiring. It seems that was the technique I was looking for, but that left me more confused. If I'd been practicing this entire time, then why are my infusions so wasteful? I'm sorry, did you expect to be a master when you only started learning less than half a year ago? Kind of? It's been a long time. Childish. He snorted, causing me to chuckle a bit. Fine. I'll just keep practicing it more. Do so. However, there is one modification that you can make if you want to rein in your intent. You just need to practice tracing those formations, but make them appear within the world. How the hell do I do that? Isn't it supposed to be an extra-dimensional power? It's not hard, really. You already do it when you empower your spirits. My face scrunched in confusion, but I sort of understood what he was saying. My psyche went beyond my body when I empowered my spirits with it, since my spirits were also beyond my body. So technically, I was already doing that. But the spirit was still the medium. To do away with that medium and make my psyche appear in the air wasn't something I thought was possible. I questioned. I can only infuse my spirits with psyche. Besides, psyche is the power of the mind. How do I make this mind power appear beyond the mind? You need a medium, of course. So find one. What appears in the air, that is connected to you, and that you can infuse your psyche into? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Well, time to figure things out on your own. Use that empty head of yours, and don't come back to class until you can read minds. Right after he said that, Maxwell ended the call. I was left staring into space in a slight daze. Read minds? How the hell was I supposed to do that? I realized that I had stopped walking at some point, but I wasn't in the mind to care that I was standing in the middle of some empty plaza. It felt like something was clicking for me, despite my confusion. What appeared in the air? Those words made me think of my intent, when Mr. Puppet said that it was literally my intentions that seeped into the air around me. So my intent was in the air, and it was undoubtedly connected to me. So was that the medium? Did I need to infuse my psyche into my intent? I suppose they were both a part of the mind. But unlike spirits, my intent wasn't something tangible that I could feel. I didn't even know it existed until a few hours ago. So how could I infuse my psyche into something I couldn't see or feel? If I figured that out, then I could manifest my psyche in the air and practice both solidifying my psyche and controlling my intent. And these thoughts made me think of something else. My coat, when it had activated and enhanced my senses. It did more than just speed up my thinking and reaction times. It actually let me see the things around me, even things that weren't within my field of vision. I had been able to see the ground under my feet and the trees to my back when fighting a puppet to my front. 360 vision. But of course, I didn't suddenly grow eyes on the back of my head. My coat took my psyche when it was activated, and it had done something with it that let me see the world with something beyond my senses. Was that what I needed to do? Mimic the effects of my coat? Use my psyche and see the world through the lens of my mind? But I couldn't just do that, even though I understood. I needed something to go off of, something to feel that could guide me, like using training wheels to ride a bike. I needed to activate the coat. Suddenly, I tapped my Ariel again. Hey, sweet cheeks. How's school? Rayla's sweet voice made me smile a bit. But I felt rushed, so I didn't humor her like I usually would. It's good. Hey, I was wondering how I could activate the coat's abilities. Oh, right, I didn't tell you about that. It activates automatically when your body is in distress. But if you want to activate it preemptively, you just need to infuse your psyche into it. You should have felt it make a connection with you, so just stream your psyche into that connection. Oh, alright. Thanks. Are you training? Something like that. Then call me later. I have some things to ask you, preferably before the week's end. Sure. We said goodbye, and I rapidly focused back on my objective. When I had first worn the coat, I had felt a wave of magic run through my body. The coat had formed a connection, making it more like a new limb rather than an accessory. Whenever I put it on, it would bond with me again. Even now I could feel the connection that appeared within my mind. So I streamed my psyche to it, filling it with my power. Once I did that, I could once again feel the effects. I could see each blade of grass at my feet, the laces of my shoes, the socks under those shoes, the buildings behind me. It was like looking into a whole new world. But more than that, I could see other people in the distance. And each of them had a faint energy around them. From that energy I could sense something about them. I could sense anxiousness, excitement, exhaustion, or anger. Most of their faces were neutral, not alluding to anything out of the ordinary. But these energies exposed their inner feelings. And on top of that, I could almost see into the future. I could see the next step they were going to take. I could guess the hand they were going to use to scratch an itch on their face, or their next movement to open a door. Their intent. I could see it and read it. It was vague, but it was there. And then, I looked around myself. I could see a much thicker intent than any of the others, perhaps because it was my own. But unlike the others, I could practically read my own mind through it. No wonder Tana was able to dodge my imaginary bullet. I was basically telling her what I was going to do through this intent of mine. But that wasn't my biggest concern. Instead, I quickly focused my psyche. I could finally feel my intent. So I let my psyche out. A little wasn't enough, so I let it all flow. I mustered the entirety of my pool, pushing it all out into this energy field of mine. The coat was acting as my guide, and I tapped into that feeling. And then, I could see it. The air, or, I should say aura was the best word for it. An aura around me that spread for dozens of meters. It was like a beacon of light, broadcasting my existence to the world. And anyone with eyes could see a bright light. This aura of mine, how it was so spread and open, made me feel exposed. Everyone else also had auras around them, most just as big as mine. And through them, I could get an even deeper glimpse into their mind, as if I was getting a hint of their thoughts. How could anyone live knowing that their thoughts were practically spilling out into the open like this? It made me shudder. Maxwell could see all this, no doubt. So this entire time, my mind had probably been an open book to him. No wonder he seemed so lofty in his attitude, as if he knew everything. He may as well have, with an ability like this. This seemed to be some kind of enlightenment for me. I need to rein this shit in as soon as possible. It's almost humiliating. I mumbled out loud, but even that was weird, because it felt like I was speaking even before I did. I was basically guessing what I was going to say, and then making true on those guesses. But with those words, I made my conviction. Then, I suddenly felt a wave of weakness and exhaustion. I faltered, falling to one knee as my supernatural awareness disappeared. No longer could I see what my eyes couldn't. However, I still felt like I was far more aware of the world, and especially the people. I could still sense a hint of the aura of those strangers in the distance, even though it was no longer as deep. It made me laugh even though I was racked with a horrible headache moments later. Truly, an enlightenment. Now, I could at least begin to work on bringing things under control. I barely managed to get to my room, where I passed out the second I threw my body onto my bed. I had probably crawled for most of the way there, but I really didn't care since I had just become enlightened. As someone who had spent his entire life on Earth, a magic-less world, these sorts of feelings were all new and eye-opening. How else was I supposed to react to being able to glimpse the thoughts and feelings of people I didn't even know? And then there was the fact that I was at the bottom of the barrel in terms of utilizing this ability. How much more was there that I could become capable of? I went to sleep with all sorts of thoughts on my mind. And it was some much-needed rest, too. I had dumped all the psyche I had into the coat and my aura. It was worth it, but I had been left a husk. Unfortunately, I slept for longer than I expected. By the time I woke up, it was already well past noon. I slept through my alarm. It made me panic, since I had missed all of my classes, the last of which was ongoing when I crawled out of bed. Well, at least I'll be rested for training. Those classes didn't particularly interest me right now, so I didn't care too much. With that, I freshened up before getting a bite to eat. The Magisterium had a nice restaurant on campus, so I checked it out and ordered some food. It was rather cheap compared to what I was used to, not that the Founders Market was a good reference to have. And after eating there, I spent the last hour or so I had assessing my new abilities. I was now aware of my own and other people's auras. And even without the coat as my guide, I could stream my psyche into it. This was the biggest barrier, but with the power of an exorbitantly expensive item, I was able to bypass it. And by infusing psyche into my aura, I could finally understand what Maxwell was talking about. I understood that my intent, along with other details about myself, were spread beyond my body through my aura. And since I could stream psyche into it, and I could control my psyche, that meant I should be able to control my aura, and by extension, my intent. I rode that simple logic and tried to test my theories. In my room, I sat in a chair and dumped some psyche into my aura. This increased my awareness of my aura by many times, similarly consuming energy. And with my psyche inside my aura, I began practicing. I used the same formations that Maxwell had taught me, forming lines and symbols of psyche. But instead of doing these things within my mind, I did them within my aura. And it was then that I saw a faint glow. A line of light appeared in front of my eyes. It was red, and it formed the same shape that I drew with my psyche. My psyche had manifested beyond my body. From there, I continued drawing. The formation was created in front of my eyes as dozens of red lines and symbols appeared in the air. But this method of drawing was different than I knew. I quickly encountered difficulties because of this difference. I wasn't simply drawing it, like paint with a brush. Instead, it felt like I needed to imagine my psyche being drawn. From there, it would be drawn. I likened it to an out-of-body experience. I wasn't doing the drawing. I was telling my mind to draw. It seemed like the same thing, but it wasn't. There was a certain detachment between the two, a line that I was barely getting the hang of writing. It took a lot of concentration, and even more than that, a suspension of disbelief. I almost couldn't understand how I was doing this, and because I didn't understand, I got close to convincing myself that I shouldn't be able to, or that it wasn't possible. But I deliberately kept myself ignorant, simply doing it whether I thought I could or couldn't. It was only by doing that I could continue, as if I started to question it, then I would lose the ability. It was similar to dreaming, where if you became aware that you were dreaming, then the dream would stop. What I had to do was something close to lucid dreaming, where I was aware that I was dreaming, but I suspended my connection to reality in order to let it play. And by doing all these things, I was able to accomplish not just controlling my psyche beyond my body, but tapping into my intent. Through this technique, controlling my psyche would be no different from controlling my intent. But it was incredibly difficult, so much so that I couldn't complete even a fraction of the formation that I had made hundreds of times before. It would require another level of control, but at least I now had another level to rise to. Knowing that, I shut things down, returning to reality. I was now tired, but thankfully I would still be able to participate in the training. But when I looked at the time, shit, I'm late. It had started 10 minutes ago. I promptly rushed out of my room and threw on my air mask, using its boost in stamina to run to the training grounds. I arrived with labored breaths, seeing a group of people outside the building. I saw Tana, who looked at me with a snicker, and Mr. Puppet, who seemed angry. Why are you late? You better have a damn good reason, or you can just go home. I don't cater to lazy asses. I was silent as he called me out. And when everyone turned to me with questioning looks, I took off my air mask and answered back with slight confidence. I was learning to control my intent. Bullshit. You didn't even know what that was yesterday. Fine. I suddenly concentrated, tapping into my aura and doing what I had just done only a few minutes ago. Suddenly, red lines sparked and appeared in front of me, writing a few segments of a formation in the air. Unfortunately, I wasn't entirely focused, not to mention I was tired, so the formations broke apart not long after. But that was enough. Mr. Puppet seemed more than surprised, as did several of the others around me. Tana especially had wide eyes. I felt a bit accomplished, so I couldn't help the smile. After a few moments, Mr. Puppet grumbled. You win. So get over here and listen up. Yes, sir. I gave a weird salute before standing with the group. He sighed. Since I'm not explaining everything again, I'll keep it short. Today we're doing a group scenario. 5 groups of 4 will each be separated into their own environments. Your goal is to raid a hive, killing the king in the process. The hives will be identical, and you will be scored based on how fast and how many enemies you kill. Total extermination will result in a perfect score, but mind you, there will only be 3 hours to complete this raid, and killing the king will require the fullest effort of every group member. Now, stand by while I form the groups. He grabbed a sheet of paper, reading off a list. Everyone's name was one I didn't know, and I watched as they all walked to the side and separated into their groups. I was a part of the 3rd group. Tana, John, Hubert, and Amara. I moved with Tana, standing off to the side. 2 others moved with us. 1 man and 1 woman, who I guessed were Hubert and Amara respectively. I nodded to them as Mr. Puppet finished forming the groups. All right. Walk through the portal and begin. Clock starts now. He gave us no time to mentally prepare, and we were forced to rush into the portal widow hut so much as an introduction. But everyone seemed used to this, so I rolled with it and entered with my group. 2 felt the weird sensation of being teleported before I appeared within a barren desert. In front of me, I could see nothing but red sand. But when I turned around, I could see huge stone structures. They rose up like towers, and many of them were connected to each other, forming walls and barriers. Their black luster told me that they weren't exactly natural formations, but knowing this world, they could be. And in the distance amongst the tops of all those towers, I could see holes that housed what seemed like huge locusts. Of course, they had the signature look of puppets, but everything else resembled the body structure of an insect. And while some had wings, others didn't. At the front, there was an entrance into what seemed like a maze of this locust hive. "Let's introduce ourselves." Someone spoke. I saw that it was Amara. She looked like a warlock, with some gray robes and a staff that held a cluster of crystals atop its pole. And although she asked to introduce ourselves, everyone ended up looking at me. So I went first with a smile. "I'm John, and I guess you could call me a ranged fighter. Pleasure to meet you all. I'm Amara. Warlock specializing in ranged spells. Hubert. Knight specializing in defensive combat. Tana. Knight specializing in offense." I nodded to the others as they gave a brief introduction. Hubert was a large man, built like a football lineman. He carried a large steel shield and sword, and his bald head gave off a meathead-type feel, contrary to his sharp, squinted eyes. And then there was Tana, the nimble swordswoman. 2 ranged fighters, a tank, and a melee fighter. It was a rather well-rounded lineup, especially since we might be fighting off some flying puppets. The others seemed pleased as well. "We have a good group." Hubert nodded pleasantly. Tana smirked a moment after, though. Yes, it would be a good group without John's fatal flaw. She smiled at me. "You can't keep quiet, can you?" "No, not really." "Then that increases the difficulty by several times." "Wait, you were the loud one yesterday?" Amara suddenly questioned, earning a nod. "Yeah, that was me. My weapons are powerful but they have a hard time keeping it down. So basically, every puppet is going to be flooding toward us so long as he's active. But I will admit, his weapons are amazingly powerful." Tana pat my shoulder before looking toward the hive. But then, Amara spoke with a thought. "If it's loud, I might be able to help. I know a sound isolation spell. It's not absolute, but it could mitigate a good chunk of the sound." "That's a thing?" I asked in surprise, and she gave me a shrug. "It's an auxiliary spell that I learned. I haven't really used it, but if it'll help, then I can. It's stationary though. That shouldn't matter too much. You two would stick in the backline anyway, so when we get into fights, you can cast the spell and John can do his thing." "That works." Everyone nodded in agreement. After that, Hubert put on his helmet and hoisted his shield. He looked like a real knight. "Then let's get going. We have 3 hours, so let's move fast. And kill fast." Tana took the front with Hubert while Amara and I followed behind. We entered the gates of the hive, getting a better view of the towers that seemed constructed of thousands of stone discs stacked on top of each other. And since the wind was mostly blocked by the walls, the wind didn't blow any sand into our eyes. However, it still shifted under our feet, making mobility a bit more of a concern. What we found were many pathways, almost like hallways, as we continued through the hive. It was a maze of these walls and towers, but in general, there seemed to be one set direction. We didn't see anything except the occasional flying locust that passed between towers. However, after covering enough distance, we arrived in a large plaza. It seemed to be a junction between several more possible paths. And within this junction, there were dozens of locusts crawling about. Hubert lowered his stance as several noticed us. Tana also unsheathed her sword. "Get ready." Casting sound isolation. Amara muttered under her breath, and before I knew it, a slight ripple in the air formed a dome around us. The sounds coming from the outside didn't change, making me think that it had done nothing. But I decided to trust it and summoned a weapon. It was my rifle, and I raised it while looking through the iron sights. My target was a flying locust that was turning our attention to us in the air. And with a quick adjustment, I pulled the trigger. Bang! The sound was the same, but nobody besides Amara recoiled at the sound. And with that shot, the flying locust fell out of the sky. Its body was much bigger than normal, probably the size of an adult man. It made me cringe as green blood splattered on the floor. At least they were easy to kill. The isolation works. "Go!" Tana shouted before dashing off, thrusting her sword and piercing the body of a locust on the ground. Her sword swung and bisected it, leaving a huge trail of blood. Hubert also prepared, staying in front of us while shield bashing a few bugs that crawled forward. And Amara prepared some spells, lights flashing in the air as arrows of ice appeared out of magic circles. A glimpse at the spells reminded me of circuits, as did most spell formations. Her icicles pierced a few different locusts after preparing for a few seconds. And I chambered another round, taking aim at another unlucky puppet. The battle was intense as a few dozen puppets flooded toward us. Although I wasn't making a huge commotion, the sounds of battle still reached the immediate vicinity, attracting more reinforcements. I was forced to fight beside Amara since she was the one maintaining the sound mitigation field. I could maneuver or run like I was used to doing while fighting, which made me a bit anxious. But I quickly found solace in the skills of my allies. Particularly, it was Hubert who brought me great reassurance. He seemed to always have an eye on his back line, constantly protecting us if anything got too close. So I never had to worry about being jumped on by 3 or 4 puppets. As for Tana, she was wreaking havoc around Hubert, maintaining a close distance but dashing in all directions as she slaughtered locusts. And with the support of my team, I was able to put in some work. My killing speed was even faster than Tana's. I could kill a locust in a single shot, and it only took a minute or so to clear the skies of anything with wings. After that, I leveled my sights and killed anything around us. But this was where my aim was stressed. With Tana dashing everyone, there was risk of hitting her, unlike Hubert, who stayed relatively still. In fact, over the course of the battle there were a few times where I almost hit her as our targets coincidentally aligned. It taught me to double-check my shots, but hesitation could also result in a delayed shot, and if Tana dashed over in that short time frame, then things could turn for the worst. It was a mix between being aware of my allies' positions and predicting their next moves. I had to read Tana's movements and work around them, because that was my job as a ranged fighter, not the other way around. So my killing speed slowed, but by that time, the small army had been cleared. It was then that the sound isolation spell went down. Around us were nothing but bloody corpses resembling locusts. I tilted my head while stepping over one. Curious how these puppets have blood. Alright, let's keep moving. Hubert motioned us along, and we formed up before traveling deeper into the hive. Between fights, my only job was staying quiet. Tana and Hubert would take care of any small groups we encountered and Amara would take out any airborne targets. So for the most part, I was simply being escorted to the next major battle. It was an interesting experience. And we had 2 more major battles, both of which I acted as our most powerful turret. Tana was second only to me, and not by much. She killed incredibly fast, only limited by her speed. And once I had taken out all airborne locusts, my killing speed would slow below hers. We were incredibly efficient. We had probably killed a few hundred in only an hour and traveled through nearly half the hive. Our progress continued at a fast pace, though I wondered how the other groups were doing. There was no leaderboard to track progress. When we finally went through half of our time, we seemed to enter the core of the hive. It was a tall dome with hundreds of pores across its walls. Each pore contained either a locust or what looked like eggs. And in the center of the dome was what looked like the queen of the hive. She was massive with a huge crown of bone and 2 large mandibles that chittered frequently. But her torso was attached to a large organic mass on the ground. It looked like a nest, so the quick assumption was that she couldn't move as she pleased. We saw all of this from outside the entrance to this dome, and it was clear that we couldn't simply walk in and do as we pleased. We would easily get swarmed, and no amount of tanking on Hubert's part could protect Amara and I from that. So we backed off and formed a plan. We need to funnel them, keep them from surrounding us and gradually taking them out. I called upon my knowledge of gaming tactics from my old life as I gave that piece of advice. And they all nodded. Yeah, that seemed to be the best course of action. But, where can we funnel them? There's plenty of walls outside the dome. True, but they won't simply walk over to us. Well, I smiled a bit and looked down at my rifle. The others smiled. Right, we have you for that. Alright, let's get into position. John, you no longer need to be quiet. Yes, ma'am. I chuckled a bit as we retreated to a set of walls that would act as a natural funnel. Once in place, I stepped out, taking aim. Over my iron sights, I could see the queen deep within the huge dome. It was frequently swarmed by locusts, and its figure within my sights was small from being a distance away. With an exhale, I pulled the trigger. Bang! My bullet sailed, and immediately after firing, I could see the queen recoil from the shot. After that, its gaze rested on my. I had hit its crown, which didn't seem to do much of anything. Screech! It let out a scream, causing me to turn tail and run back behind Hubert. I pissed it off. We can see that. Just start killing them. Hubert, I'll block them with you. Amara, prepare crowd control. Roger. With her hands spread, Amara began preparing some more complex spells, her mouth uttering a foreign language as lights flashed around her. Tana and Hubert took position at the choke point, while I kept my eye on the sky. Air neutrality was what I secured first and foremost. And without suspense, the hundreds of locusts within the dome began to swarm out. I didn't hesitate to fire as many rounds as I could. With each bullet, I would either miss or outright kill a locust. I would say my accuracy could be rated 7 out of 10 shots. Which for flying locusts was rather good. And there were plenty of flying locusts. But still not nearly as many as those crawlers. Tana and Hubert were quickly jumped on, but before they could be overwhelmed, Amara finished her spell. Her eyes opened while the light of the complex spell before her flashed with brilliance. Corrosion. She clapped her hands, and the spell dissipated. At that moment, an orb of some dark substance appeared amidst the attacking hordes. It rapidly grew into a ball of acidic green slime before suddenly compressing and exploding. It released waves of not only corrosive gas, but heinous-smelling and awfully sticky slime. It covered 2/3 of the locusts, even many in the air, dragging them down as their wings were corroded. And with most of the locusts slowed down, Tana and Hubert had a far easier time keeping them away from us. My accuracy also went up, poking dozens out of the sky with rapid shots. But sheer numbers wasn't all the hive offered. Suddenly, we heard some distinct roars. 3 large beetles emerged at that moment, armored and pissed off. I quickly released a test shot. Bang! Ting! The bullet ricocheted off their armor. With a frown, I empowered another shot with a large chunk of Psycha before aiming just under its head. Bang! Roar! This time, the bullet sunk into its body, causing the beast to recoil in pain. But it didn't seem to do that much other than slow it down. Just clear out the fodder. Then we can focus on the big ones. Tana shouted, and my sights left the beetles. I shot with more haste, doing my best to kill as many of the locusts. As the beetles marched forward, Amara seemed to recover from the big spell and spoke to me. John, how's your energy? I still got plenty. Why? I'm going to be sparing to save energy for the big ones. Can you compensate? I'm shooting as fast as I can right now. If you feel that's enough, then go ahead and rest. I spoke while pulling the trigger and slinging the lever action of the rifle. And Amara seemed to deem my effort sufficient as she took a back seat, keeping an eye out but not casting any spells. Since most of the locusts could be killed with one shot, I didn't have to spend that much energy even after killing as many as I did. Ammo took a shockingly small amount of Psycha to summon, and my communion with the spirits gradually took Psycha away over time. It was very efficient, and with my practice in the trenches, my stamina in combat was rather exceptional. Of course, that was until tough enemies came around, in which case I got tired very fast. But if it was just fodder like this, I could go all day. I let loose shots with frightening speed, impressing even myself. You could only shoot so fast with a lever action, after all. And reloading took some time as well. Thankfully, the corrosion spell combined with my speed made quick work of the flying bugs. With that, Tana and Hubert only had to stave off the crawlers. Which they did well, until the big ones arrived. The beetles came with oppressive strength. To my shock, Hubert directly fought them, taking their massive blows head-on. But him and his shield managed to block them without retreat. But that was only one. Tana harassed the other 2, keeping their eyes on her. And I focused on killing any remaining crawlers until there were none left. It was perhaps 20 minutes into the battle that only the big beetles remained. It was then that Amara came back, shouting out to Tana. Weakness. Their underbelly. And their backside. Other than their face, that's it. All right. Amara took the information, and their exchange taught me a bit about what seemed like standard protocol during battles. She then turned to me. Can you shoot any of their weak points? Not really their underbelly. If I could get behind them, I could shoot them in the back. But we gotta get out of this funnel first. Sure. Tana. Hubert. Push out of the choke. John will loop around behind them. Got it. Ha! Hubert acknowledged with a roar. Then, he hoisted his shield and charged toward his beetle. The bug was blown out of the funnel, and he looped around. In panic, the big followed him, creating a big gap in space. Tana also pulled one away, but the other turned toward Amara and I. She shouted. I'll distract it. Now go. She cast some fire spells with those words, burning the face of the beetle. At the same time, I sprinted off toward the gap in the funnel. I entered the large area between the walls and the dome, circling around while evading the beetles that were occupied with their prey. And my first target was the beetle on Amara. She couldn't last long, so I got around it and focused. I didn't have to go far, and since I was already close, my weapon of choice was easy. A double-barrel shotgun was the normal choice, but after spending some more time cultivation and probing my third star, I had found a more powerful spirit. A quadruple-barrel shotgun, with a thick body that made it seem more like a cannon. All 4 shots could be fired at once, not that I would ever try such a thing. With that weapon, I charged behind the beetle harassing Amara. And I quickly spotted its weakness, a fleshy backside that was relatively unprotected compared to its armored front. I took aim, and waited for the bug to steady before pressing one of the 2 triggers down fully. A significant portion of my psycho left with the slugs. Bang bang. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession, and the backside of the beetle was torn asunder. Blood sprayed everywhere, but I wasn't finished. I let off the other 2 shots after I steadied the weapon. Bang bang. Another 2, and even more gore than before. This time, the beetle couldn't seem to handle it as it rapidly weakened while trying to spin around. I backed away as blood poured out of the puppet. But with its front turned toward me, Amara had a clear shot. Explode. She cast a quick spell, and a shard of ice was created. It gouged into the beetle's body before exploding into fragments, destroying the bug from the inside. It collapsed only moments after. I nodded to Amara from across the corpse before running off. After that, I went on to help Tana while Amara worked with Hubert to ease some of the pressure. Tana had already done some damage herself that weakened the beetle, and with my help, it rapidly fell. The other was the same way. Hubert ended his adversary while sinking his blade into its neck. With that, all 3 armored soldiers were killed. But it wasn't easy. My empowered shotgun took a lot out of me. Tana and Hubert had to wrestle with those beetles alone, while Amara cast a huge area spell that slowed or killed much of the locust swarm. We were all spent, but there was still 1 enemy left. We trudged toward the now empty dome. The queen had yet to leave her nest, though I wasn't sure if she could. Her body seemed attached to it. But before we could enter, Hubert stopped us. Hang on. We all looked at him before looking at the queen. She was gazing at us with hostility, but she was quiet. She seemed to be waiting for us to come to her. It's a trap. Probably. What do we do then? Tana asked, but then they all turned to me. I looked back at them weirdly. You want me to kill it? Can you? Getting close could be dangerous. I can also help. Amara stepped up beside me. Seeing her, I just shrugged. I'll try, but that armor might be a pain. Hey, see if you can't burn the nest she's attached to while I shoot. Sure. Amara nodded and started casting, even though she seemed exhausted. And I exchanged the quad shotgun for a rifle, taking aim at the stationary target. Unlike the shotgun, I didn't have a fancy variant rifle. I made a mental note to go digging more for one later. I gazed at the massive inferno in front of me, my head throbbing and a bit dizzy. The queen had been a sitting duck, relying on its guards to protect her. And she was directly attached to her nest in some grotesque fashion, so she had no way to attack us who kept our distance. Amara had cast a simple fireball spell, igniting the entire nest and letting her burn. And I put a few bullets into her mouth, ending her quickly. But the fire didn't stop and continued to burn until the entire dome was lit on fire. I suppose it wasn't made of stone after all, since it had turned into probably the largest bonfire I had ever seen. We all sat around watching the tower of flames. Our objective was complete. But we didn't immediately leave. There was still time before the scenario ended. So instead, I ruminated in silence. This scenario was valuable experience. For the first time I had cooperated with others in holding off hordes of beasts that were supposed to resemble the scourge. I had found the limits of my crowd control abilities, had to stress my aim while shooting around my allies, and learned how to let others protect me. I felt like I did good, especially since it was my first time doing anything like this. After reflecting on everything, I also discussed things with the others. I asked about any of my deficiencies, but they didn't have anything negative to say. With the sound isolation spell, one of my few weaknesses was taken away. In fact, my weapons were decisive in killing not only as many locusts as we did, but taking care of those armored beetles. Without me, they would have stressed themselves far more than they did, and even then it was questionable whether they could make it out alive. Dominating the skies and providing powerful attacks had made me an asset no lesser than them. And I was still only an Authority 3. Considering that the others were Authority 4 or 5, I was doing very well. Finally, after some waiting and recovering, we all felt our bodies be pulled back to the outpost. After teleporting, I could see all the other groups. Like us, they seemed battered and tired. Some even had bloody injuries. On the contrary, none of us were wounded. Mr. Puppet came out of his room and looked us all over. Congratulations. Most of you achieved perfect scores, which is just about expected. Of course, some were faster than others. I present to you, the first place team. He lifted his arm, motioning toward us. I was surprised, but my expression was hidden behind my air mask. Mr. Puppet didn't have anything else to say about our team, so without suspense, he waved us off. You're done for the day. Tomorrow is basic hunting. John, you stay. Yes, sir. I walked over with a smile. The two of us entered the room after I said goodbye to my team. Once the two of us were alone, he slumped down into a chair as I took off my air mask. Be honest, how difficult was that compared to your work? I would say it's pretty easy, actually. There was never a threat to my life. Not even an injury. It was really only a workout. Humph, show off. He snorted before looking back at the screens. On one of them was a video of my battle outside the dome. I placed Amara in your group knowing she had that sound spell. It got you guys through the maze with ease, almost too much ease. And with Hubert protecting his back line, you never had to worry much about close combat. In all, that team was almost perfect for you. You'll do good to remember that for your trip. Still, even then I had underestimated just how freakish your weapons are. He looked toward another screen. It was a close-up shot of me and my quad-barrel shotgun when I was using it to decimate those beetles. Everyone else hit a wall with those beetles. But with the others distracting them, you were able to debilitate those things unhindered. Your instincts are good in regards to keeping distance and managing the threats around you. But, that damage. He shook his head, as if unbelieving of the power my guns contained. It made me smile with a bit of pride. I finally understand why Maxwell is so serious about you. Your only weakness is your defense. Also, I saw you slow down your shots frequently when your targets were anywhere near your teammates. Understandable, but with your lethality, more will be expected of you. You'll need to work on your aim and awareness. But even then, developing your control over your psyche and aura will solve those problems. How so? Please, there's no way you didn't feel it. He scoffed at me while pulling his eyes away from the screen. Then, I could feel his gaze seemingly pierce through me. You actually managed to infuse psyche into your aura. I've heard of only prodigies that could do so at your authority. For reference, half of the elites here today are authority 4. And only 3 of those at authority 5 are able to do what you do. So you can understand the rarity of such an achievement. And you also know that your aura is a powerful tool for understanding your surroundings and others. If you can read other people's intents, and have perfect control over your body, there will be nothing to worry about in regards to your aim. Oh, I see. I pondered his words, simultaneously recalling my past experience with infusing psyche into my aura. So much as becoming aware of my aura gave me a deep awareness of the world and people around me, far more than before. Instead of merely seeing with my eyes and listening with my ears, I could feel the lives around me and react without even looking. I could feel threats as they approached, could feel my body on a deeper level and exercise greater control over my muscles. My agility had increased by a significant amount, and my mental abilities jumped with it as my psyche was evolved. The power of the mind, psyche, was a powerful thing in the right hands. Why it wasn't given to warlocks, I had no idea. It would be perfect for them who cast spells all the time. Regardless, these powers would be greatly beneficial to me. Shooting guns was a very sensory-driven activity, relying on your sight and the precise control over your fine motor movements. It also required extensive knowledge on your weapon, yourself, your target, and everything around it. Processing all these variables on the fly couldn't be done by just anybody, and even with the skills and memories within my spirits, I was still developing my personal capabilities. Psyche, by extension, would expedite all of that and shatter the skill ceiling associated with the art of marksmanship, opening up greater levels of power. I could only grow from here, and I was beginning to see the definitive path forward. You just keep practicing. In fact, that should be your main focus for the next few weeks. You're not going to advance anytime soon, so honing your control over psyche and your aura is paramount. And when I see you here, I expect to see that practice. I don't want you focusing on competition at all. The only exception is during team scenarios, of which we will have 2 more before the end of the week. Alright. Then get on out of here and recover. He waved me out, and I left the training grounds. I walked to the Magisterium's restaurant first, ordering some food to go before heading to my room and chowing down. I didn't have anything to cook, and with my savings, was too lazy to bother. As I was eating though, I got a call. It was Rayla, so I picked up with enthusiasm. Hey sweet cheeks. Hey, how goes work? Funny you should ask. I'm actually calling to pass a message to you. Her tone became a level more serious. According to Plex, Patriarch Tavera has requested you for a job. He wants you at your earliest convenience within the next day or so. Is that so? I kicked back in a chair, curious about this sudden job. Do you have any details? Well, I know you're not the only one. I guess the Tavera family is moving something big or numerous, but they're putting together an escort team for a load of cargo. And you're moving between cities, so it's a big deal. Obviously, you'll also be paid handsomely, but it'll be a multi-day trip. Plex will also be going. I see. Are you going? Unfortunately no. I'm staying behind with Libitus and Tovex to run things during Plex's absence. I would be if you declined though. I rubbed my chin with a moment of silence. Do you want to take it? I can just leave it to you. Honey, there's no way I'm taking away this chance from you. Developing rapport with the Tavera family is crucial. To reject now will basically burn the bridge between you two. Don't ever expect another request if you turn this one down. Well, that doesn't really leave me with a choice now, does it? Not really, but it's not like you're missing much at the Magisterium. You'll obviously be fighting during your trip. This isn't something that's gone unnoticed by the other powers, so you'll get your practice. That's comforting. Well, I guess I accept the job. When do I report? Tomorrow, go to the Tavera mansion during operating hours. You'll meet with the Patriarch and he'll give you the details. Also, I recommend pulling some coin out for the trip. You'll be at a new city, so you never know when you'll need some. Just throw it in your bracelet. Sure. Good. Now, catch me up. With business out of the way, the both of us continued to talk into the night. Or, it was more so night for me and morning for her. I mentioned my new ability to sense aura and infuse my psyche into it, which she was more than shocked about. Unfortunately, there wasn't much advice she could give me since she was a warlock, not a summoner. Plus, she hadn't been able to do the same until she was an Authority 6. But she did tell me that this ability single-handedly managed to drive her authority up an entire rank. Without it, she would have never jumped to Authority 8, regardless of her feelings about her personal talent. After that, we talked for an hour or so before I decided to head to bed. I was still tired from the scenario earlier in the day, and now I knew that I had an eventful trip ahead of me that I would need to prepare for. The next day, I arrived at the training grounds after classes. It was there that I spent about an hour hunting and working on my psychic control. I also notified Mr. Puppet about my absence in the coming days. He wasn't happy, but he knew about my work from Maxwell, so there wasn't much of an argument to put up. I left after having done a proper workout with my psyche, and when the sun set, I was off to the Founders Market. I found myself smiling as I greeted Chef Black at my usual entrance. The man was excited at my arrival, not having seen me in a while. I chatted with him briefly before heading in. My steps then took me to the Tavera territory where the mansion was located. I immediately noticed the change. Unlike normally, I found plenty of Tavera's men who were scurrying around. It was much more active, and if it was this obvious to me, then it was even more so for the other powers. They were doing something big. I was curious as to what. I walked up to the mansion whose doors were wide open today. It was there that I met an attendant who was expecting my arrival. My meeting with the Patriarch was prompt. Ah, John. I appreciate you responding to my request, despite your busy schedule at the Magisterium. It's no problem, Patriarch. Besides, I've been getting itchy lately. It's been too relaxed in that cushy school. You're doing me a favor. We shook hands with a few laughs before he invited me to sit. I'm glad things are working out as such. And forgive me for being so succinct. As you can guess, we've been busy preparing. Sure. Then, I'll lay out my request clearly. The gruff man straightened himself out within his seat, looking down at a map on his desk. I analyzed it too, and it gave a large overview of what was considered the Kingdom of Dragon Tongue. The kingdom's territory seemed to be located toward the southern region of a large continent. Below them were mountain ranges covered in ice and snow, while above them were several other cities. Above that was the war zone, the frontier of the war against the Scourge. He pointed to one city that was between the frontier and the capital city in the rear. Our destination is the major city of Joffrin. It's a major distribution landmark, responsible for facilitating a majority of the trade between the capital city and the frontier cities. We're delivering cargo there, and the trip to get there will take an estimated 6 days with only a few delays. However, this is also on an unofficial road that runs parallel with the major road. He traced a faint line that ran beside a thicker trail. This hidden road was no doubt a smuggling route, and instead of taking the path most traveled, it ran through the untrodden forest beside it. There was even a small mountain range between them that it ran through. I could already tell this trip wouldn't be very fun or relaxed. There will be 2 waves, but the first wave is the only one that matters. It will have almost all the cargo and personnel. You will be on that first wave, and you will also be facing whatever attacks that await you. We've already heard reports of the Clockwork Association sending out men. So a fight is guaranteed. However, this is exactly where you shine. He smiled at me, and I finally figured out why I was specifically requested. My weapons were powerful, and there was only one enemy that could give me a hard time. They were the resilient knights. As for warlocks and summoners, well, the entirety of the trenches already knew that I couldn't be touched unless you sent a juggernaut at me. They learned that the hard way. So if I were up against the warlocks of the Clockwork Association, then I should be having an easy time. Even more so if I were protected by the knights of the Tavera family. I was beginning to think that this trip might go smoother than originally thought. I was their specialist hired almost exclusively to hunt a bunch of wizards. The patriarch smiled at me, as if reading my thoughts. I can guarantee your protection, so long as the convoy isn't decimated. And all I ask is that you prevent that from ever being able to happen. You'll be paid handsomely for this work of yours, the terms of which are listed in this contract. He handed me a sheet of paper, which I took with a curious eye. I quickly read through the simple clauses. Legalities weren't much of a thing here, but for something this big, having a contract would eliminate confusion and misunderstandings. After a quick read, I found that I really was being paid well. I would be paid a baseline rate of 85,000 coin, which was already a lot. But there was also something like a commission. Basically, I would be paid for my kills. The pay would depend on the enemy, specifically if they were powerful or valuable. But otherwise, the rate per kill was 5,000 coin. If there was anyone at Authority 6 or above, then I could be paid upward of 15,000 per kill. I barely held back my glee. My bullets were becoming valuable. And all this money was going straight to me. I wouldn't have to cut the profit with others. As for verifying my kills, that would be done by one of the Patriarch's men. At the end of the trip, we would compare our numbers, check the discrepancy, and pay accordingly. They were fair terms, so I readily signed. Patriarch Tavera smiled. Good. You will be leaving at dawn. Simply report to the North Gate. All basic necessities will be given to you, like food. I do recommend that you pack a small chest's worth of items, like spare clothes or any personal items. You will be leaving the range of the capital city, which means that using the bank and communication will be impossible. There will also be healers and proper sleeping arrangements, so your experience won't be completely miserable. Haha, right. Thank you, Patriarch. Consider this expedition a success. I expect nothing less from the American. He laughed as we said goodbyes. After that, I went back to my room at the Magisterium. It was there that I started packing a few things. The space within my spatial bracelet wasn't huge, but it was enough for what I needed. I only planned to bring 2 sets of clothing, and one of them was the one I had on. My primary choice in clothing was all enchanted with various convenient things like self-cleaning, durability, and mild temperature regulation. With all the money I had, I simply didn't settle for less, especially when this world lacked the technology of Earth. What I packed would get me through the trip just fine. But there were other things that I decided to stock up on. One of those things were my recovery pills. I hadn't had to use them since I stopped working, but now they would probably come in handy. I threw the rest of my stash into my bracelet. I always kept a few on me regardless, but now they were all there. With that, I was basically set. Besides food, there really wasn't much else that I used throughout the day, besides the luxuries of a shower and porcelain throne. Well, I'll be cutting it kind of close. Yeah, seems like you won't be getting much rest for the next several weeks. I yawned as Rayla spoke from beside me. Since I had to wake up bright and early, she decided to take me to the North Gate after her work in the market. Our topic of conversation was the fact that there wasn't that much time left until the Magisterium would send me away on our hunting trip. This trip with the Tavera family would take a week, and that was with only a few hiccups factored in. It could take longer depending on the attacks that were thrown our way. Thankfully, there was one new detail that gave me a bit of solace. Turns out, there was a dedicated railway between the capital city and the city of Joffrin. This railway was precisely as I assumed it. It was a magic train dedicated exclusively to moving people and light amounts of cargo. This was because it moved underground. There was a network of these railways between all the major cities, especially going to and from the frontier cities. They were built as a quick response network for the military, but eventually became somewhat commercialized as the technology got better. We wouldn't be using this railway to get to Joffrin, but we had the option of taking it back. Apparently it wasn't cheap, costing a few hundred coin for just one short and cheap trip. But what was a few hundred coin to me? I often forgot that I was actually kind of rich by the normal standard, and a single well-placed bullet during this cargo haul would outright cover any expenses. So I absolutely planned on taking this train back. Still, even with this, I would have around a week and a half before I was once again sent off for another expedition. Since it was morning, I was tired. And the thought of going on 2 back-to-back trips had me feeling even more so. Rayla gently rubbed my back comfortingly. Not far from us was the North Gate. I'm sure everything will be fine. You just need to focus on coming back from this trip. It's going to be dangerous. People will die, and don't think that you can't be one of them. Well, I can't say that I'm not a bit relaxed. After all, I managed to find myself a piece of insurance last night. Really? A new weapon? Uh-huh. Why do you think I'm so tired? I smiled while rubbing the bags under my eyes. I was up late, but it was worth it considering what I found. She sighed. All right. But your safety comes before all else. Money means nothing if you can't come home to use it. I expect you to buy me a drink with all that money when you get back. Of course. We can even get dinner at the caviar restaurant. Just stop worrying so much. I'll be fine. I turned to Rayla a bit of a distance from the gate. I could see Tavera insignias from here, and they were beginning to gather. But Rayla was really worried. I could tell, despite the smile she wore. It almost seemed like she was sending me off to war. I wrapped her up in a hug, which she returned with a squeeze. I'll be back in a week, okay? Just make sure you don't gain any weight from stress eating those cookies of yours. Ugh! Right as the moment was good. She scoffed and pinched my arm, but I couldn't feel much through my coat, making me laugh. Just then, she abruptly turned her head. I followed, seeing Plex walk over with a smile. Hey you two. How goes it? Hello Plex. Rayla greeted, and Plex turned toward me. Go ahead and check in John. We're leaving soon. Oh, all right. I nodded before giving Rayla one more quick hug and walking off. I checked in with the captain of this convoy, who verified my identity and thanked me for being there. That was when I turned my head, looking back toward Plex and Rayla. She seemed to be scolding him, or at least lecturing. Her face was dead serious as Plex just stood there and scratched his head weirdly. I turned away before they could see me staring out at the large convoy that was parked in front of the gates. The North Gate was a literal gate connected to the walls that surrounded the capital city. They were grand and manned by plenty of guards, but also built with a bit of a fortress feel to them with tall watchtowers. It was no doubt built for war, but thankfully never used for it. I was surprised though about the Tavera convoy. They were being incredibly obvious about everything they were doing, and even beyond their enemies, the kingdom was doing nothing to stop it. Would the kingdom simply allow them to smuggle and operate totally unhindered, as if they were legitimate merchants? It was amazing to think about, but that's exactly what was happening. Hey, tell me something. My thoughts were interrupted as Plex suddenly appeared beside me. It chilled my neck a little considering I had heightened awareness after realizing my aura. I was beginning to realize how powerful Plex really was. He pat my shoulder. Just how chummy did you and Rayla get? What do you mean? I mean, it's like she's your wife and sending you off to war. What the hell did you do to her that's got her all worried over you? We're just good friends. I spoke casually, but I was suddenly anxious. No longer could I simply hide my thoughts with acting. I knew Plex could see a certain level of my thoughts and feelings, and considering how he almost immediately smirked in amusement, I was absolutely sure he picked up on something. I cursed my inability to rein in my aura and closed my eyes. Just watch my back during the trip. Hee, dodging topics is like admitting guilt. Stop trying to read my mind. In fact, I'll be picking your brain about aura too. So you've learned about it? He asked with a smile, making me shrug. After that, the captain of the convoy called everyone over, preparing to leave. I was assigned a wagon, so I went to board it. But before doing so, I turned back to Rayla standing in the distance. She waved as she stood alone within the plaza before the gates, her red hair blowing just slightly with the morning breeze. I waved back, but the sight of their standing alone soured my mood as I thought about her history. I could imagine why she was worried, and I hated that I was making her feel that way. It went beyond just watching me go on a dangerous trip. It was risking losing someone that you cared about. I forcefully pulled my gaze away and entered the large wagon. Plex quickly noticed the change in my mood, but I didn't care. I took a seat, and before long, the convoy started moving. It didn't take us long for the convoy's path to diverge from the standard route. It was only a couple miles beyond the city gates that they turned down an unobvious but still decently tread road. Most of the surroundings around the capital were grasslands and farmland. There weren't many forests, probably all having been cleared out for their wood. Most of my focus though was surveying the convoy I was protecting. At first, there had only been 6 wagons. Each wagon was only a bit smaller than a semi-truck from Earth. They were equipped with comfortable interiors, large rubber wheels, a metal structure, and some hatches that acted as windows. Some were filled with cargo, and some held people. These wagons had already impressed me enough. In fact, they were closer to actual trucks than otherwise. They were magical armored vehicles that took us across dirt roads with speeds exceeding 40 miles per hour. But these 6 vehicles weren't the only ones. After driving for a while, the convoy stopped for a moment. There were 2 other vehicles that we met with, ones that had been stationed ahead in advance. And these monsters were something I didn't expect to see in this world. They were basically mobile fortresses. They called them the hunkers, and these 2 vehicles were twice as wide and a bit longer than a normal semi-truck. They were plated with layered steel that glowed with magic enchantments, making them as tough as a tank. And while they lacked their own armament, there were protected turrets that warlocks could launch spells from on their tops. These 2 hunkers would act as the core of the convoy, transporting the most valuable cargo while acting as a fortress that we could defend from. Plex and I were moved to the hunker that took up a position near the rear. I was also introduced to a turret, a place perfect for a ranged fighter such as myself. They were making my job incredibly easy. Though, such things were synonymous with more effective protection as well. After arranging the convoy proper, the true trip started. For the most part, it involved sitting around and waiting for something to happen. Fuel came in the form of white crystals, of which there was plenty, so the convoy would only come to a stop once a day during noon where we would need to handle any business of ours. During that time, while everyone settled themselves, all the food for our meals would be cooked and we would be allowed to do things like bathe a bit. There were also scouts that were responsible for keeping watch during all hours of the day and night. People like myself and the few warlocks on board were required to keep ourselves rested until we were attacked so that we could respond effectively. Being inside the hunker, my anxiety was significantly decreased. It was wonderful how strong armor eased your worries. Even if we were suddenly hit with a barrage of spells, we would be perfectly fine and could respond with relative ease. Even those in the standard wagons were still protected by some metal. But I was still a bit stiff as I felt the vibration of the hunker rolling across the moderately rough road. It didn't ease my mind to know that we were sitting ducks and were being targeted for every leg of this trip. And there was nothing we could do to preemptively eliminate any threats. Being on the other end of guerrilla warfare was nerve-wracking. They'll probably give it time. Plex suddenly appeared and took a seat next to me, muttering those words with a bottle of alcohol in his hand. 2 things happen as time goes on. People either become complacent, or a nervous wreck. So they'll wait until we're most vulnerable, which will probably be in 3 or 4 days. Thus, it's the last 2 days that will be the most dangerous. So enjoy the peace and quiet until then. Doesn't help. I mumbled back, causing him to laugh while leaving. It was obvious that the end of the trip would be the worst. Their goal was to keep us from arriving at the city of Joffrin, and if they failed earlier on, they would get desperate and throw everything they had at us. I wouldn't be surprised if an entire army showed up to bar our path. Well, this was when it paid to be a ranged fighter. I just needed to stick around in the back and do what I did best. Or at least, that's what I thought. The first day passed, and my anxiousness grew. It was difficult to go to sleep. And that was disregarding the weird feeling I was having. The hunker, while large with rubber wheels, wasn't exactly smooth. Suspension was a piece of tech this world had yet to perfect. But the droning of the vehicle served to at least make me drowsy. And the bunk beds within were soft, though cramped. You couldn't actually sit up in them. There was probably only 16 inches between my mattress and the bottom of the next bed. But for some reason, I couldn't fall asleep. I had my eyes closed for about an hour, but my mind seemed to be overactive. I kept thinking about what could happen, how we could be hit with magic missiles at a moment's notice. And I couldn't see well in the dark. One thing that the convoy did was kill all lights. It let everyone's vision adapt to the dark so that if we were attacked, everyone would be able to see. Any lanterns were snuffed for that reason. But at a distance, my vision still suffered when it was dark. How was I supposed to hit my shots? If anything, I would make myself a beacon with each bullet fired. I was starting to think that night time was the worst time for us to get attacked. After a while of trying to force myself to sleep to no avail, I tossed around and opened my eyes. Although it was dark, the moon was always bright, and the turrets weren't far from us. Their openings let in light like a natural lantern. It was easily midnight, and while I lay there, I saw someone in a bunk not far away shift around. He crawled out with a yawn and looked around. I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. I don't know why I did, but I felt it would be weird if you saw someone just staring at you from their bed. And well, perhaps that was my best decision on the trip. Because a few seconds later, I heard the slightest noise that made my instincts kick in. A knife sliding out of a leather sheath. It was quiet, but I recognized the metallic sound. And peeking one eye open, I saw that man holding a bright silver blade. He walked over toward me, and I felt my heart beat out of my chest. But he didn't seem focused on me, so I kept pretending as he stopped right in front of my bunk. Then, my eyes flew open. A sawed-off double-barrel shotgun appeared in my hand, and I pointed it from under my sheets. I obviously shifted a bit, making noise. But that was also when I heard another sound. Ack! It wasn't loud, but in this quiet room, it may as well have been a scream. I heard liquid, and the metal of the blade, along with the sudden struggle of the unlucky victim. That's when I took aim, right at the only portion of the assassin's torso I could see. His crotch. Boom. The sound was deafening, especially in an enclosed space. But hey, it was an assassin. What else should I do? Let him kill someone? And as expected, the entire hunker roared to life. Everyone around me jolted awake as the assassin's body flew backward. His lower body was now a mess of gore, and he started vomiting profusely after he landed. I didn't take another shot, instead shooting to my feet and taking a look at the man in the bunk above me. I quickly got a look. The right side of his neck was bleeding, and his hand was pressing against it as hard as he could even though blood continued to flow. At the same time, a man ran in. He was the captain of this convoy. What happened? Get a healer! I shouted back right at him, my ears still ringing from the shotgun blast. He seemed confused, so I yelled again. Get a healer, unless you want this man to die. Healer! Thankfully, he took my word for it. He ran out, and only a second or so later, I saw him dragging another man back by the collar. It was a healer, and he was placed in front of me. Heal him. Knife wound to the neck. All right. He stammered. Everyone was asleep, so the wake-up call was jarring. But these were experienced men. Without hesitation, the healer cast a spell, lines conjuring above the wounded man and targeting his neck. At that moment, I turned around, facing the captain. Then, I pointed to the man who was still groaning on the floor in agony. Him. He's the assassin. Son of a bitch. The captain cursed, walking over with a scowl and looking down on the assassin with rage. I didn't think they'd get into our ranks. John, right? Yes. You've done well. This will not go unrewarded. Well, it's my life on the line too. I gave a perfunctory response. It would have been bad if this assassin was able to operate unhindered. For all I know, it would have been my life next. Doc, how is he? The captain asked the healer, who nodded. He had collected his bearings and could operate on the victim with more care now. He'll be fine. It was lethal, but we responded in time. Plus, he seemed to have been able to dodge a blow that would have otherwise killed him. He'll be asleep for the next day though, and I need about half an hour to operate. When he wakes, he'll be good as new. The captain nodded. After that, he went around calming everyone. With the blast, everyone had woken up expecting to do battle. The convoy had even stopped. But we all needed sleep, and the threat had been dealt with. While we still needed to be on alert, we also didn't need to make everyone paranoid. The captain grabbed another healer who went to work preserving the assassin's life, at least for a little while. He was also dragged away, probably to be questioned and tortured. Well, that was beyond my pay grade. All I know was that, despite the hectic event, I managed to pass right out upon getting into bed. And I slept like a log that night. Second day of the trip. There were many people who were on edge, and it was understandable. There had been an assassin in our ranks, so people became wary. But when the convoy was stopped a couple hours before noon in order to give everyone some downtime, a meeting was called. Turns out, the assassin wasn't someone of the Tavera family. Apparently, all those of the family were given a tattoo, and the assassin didn't have one upon inspection of his corpse. Apparently, he had killed one of the people of the convoy and managed to board without raising suspicions. This was in part due to a mask he wore, one that was constructed to look just like the victim he replaced. Regardless, the assassin wasn't a traitor, which eased most of the worries. However, as a precaution, the entire convoy went through a small inspection. There was a list of everyone on the convoy, along with the hired muscle like myself and Plex. And one by one, each member of the family was called upon to inspect their tattoo. Every tattoo was placed on the center of the chest. The symbol was of two sabers crossed between each other, the blades pointing to either shoulder. Each blade also had two different inscriptions written on them, while the hilts bore red ruby charms. This tattoo was only given to members of the family who had sworn themselves after reaching a certain age and going through a trial by fire. And there was nobody besides Plex and I who wouldn't have the tattoo. After all, this was a very sensitive mission. Nobody who wasn't absolutely loyal or trustworthy to the family would be brought on this trip. So with the captain, Plex and I watched as everyone on the convoy was inspected. Everyone passed with ease. Nobody who went up was nervous, because none of them were assassins or spies. However, when everyone had stepped up and gotten inspected, the inspector ran through his list and frowned. He walked up to the captain and reported, "Sir, there's one person who didn't show. Is it the victim who the assassin impersonated?" "No." The captain went quiet and looked back toward the convoy. Then, he looked toward Plex. "Can you find him?" "Sure thing, friend. Unless he already bailed." Plex smiled and suddenly disappeared. After that, the captain and I waited. We saw the occasional door open on the vehicles, but otherwise, there were no sounds. After a mere minute, Plex reappeared in front of us, shrugging. "There's nobody inside the convoy. So they either left last night or have stealth skills that surpass mine. Let's pray it's not the latter." The captain grumbled before turning back to the inspector and muttering some things. "Mark him as dead, and if anybody finds him, he's to be arrested on sight." "Understood. Then let's get rolling." With that, the convoy resumed its journey. As we drove, I hung around inside one of the turrets. It was an enclosed extrusion on the top of the hunker with a single narrow window that circled all the way around it, like a pillbox. This way, you could attack without worrying about getting hit. For the most part anyway. I was in there for several hours, half sleeping and half enjoying the sights of the landscapes that we passed by. Being able to see miles of untouched land was a rarity on Earth, especially in America. It was always either farmland, towns, or cities. So a genuine wilderness was new, not that I hadn't at least been to some national parks. I even saw some new animals that wandered around the road. When the sun began to set though, Plex suddenly came to me with the day's dinner. It was a large bowl of meatloaf and some weird veggies. "Eat up. The food is probably going to get worse as we go, so enjoy it while you can." "Right. Oh, since you're here, let me ask you something." I spoke while dropping down from the turret, keeping Plex from leaving. I sat on a stair while taking a bite, as did he. "Yesterday, I was a bit on edge. And then an assassin popped out of nowhere. Now that he's dead, I'm perfectly fine. Can you tell me what that's all about?" "Yeah. That's your attunement into aura." He confirmed my guess as if it was obvious. Being aware of auras naturally reveals certain things about people, even if you don't realize. This is what normal people call a gut feeling or their sixth sense. The people who have a really good gut feeling have a higher attunement into aura than normal. But when you actually realize your aura, that gut feeling gets far stronger and more accurate. "Okay. So were you feeling nervous?" "Ha. That's funny." Plex snickered at me and took a swig of alcohol. And on second thought, it really was a stupid question. I've never actually seen Plex nervous about anything. The only one he treated with seriousness was Apocryon, and that was for good reason. That psycho could hurt me just by looking at me. Thinking that far, something suddenly clicked. Hey, during our delivery for Apocryon, when I had those visions and was hurt. Yeah, that was him fucking with your aura. That man is feared for several reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is his attunement into aura. Aura is a mysterious thing. It's far rarer to tap into it than to be blessed with a crest, and those who can get good with it are prodigies among those few. How he can do what he did, I have no idea. It's a field that nobody knows anything but the basics about. I see. Plex's words made me curious. On one hand, there was Apocryon who could induce hallucinations and nightmares by interacting with other people's auras. And on the other hand, there was Plex who could rein in and conceal his aura. Along with invisibility, it made him virtually undetectable. You wouldn't know he existed until he was right in front of you. Two totally different ways of wielding aura, and both of them had great application. I surely had a lot to learn. And with that in mind, I turned back to Plex. Hey, can you teach me to conceal my aura like you do? While I was at the magisterium, there was somebody who was able to predict my shots because of it. They said my intent wasn't concealed. Your intent and aura are two different things. Sure, your intent spills out through your aura, but concealing your intent is much easier than concealing your aura. And how's it done? Fine, I guess I can dispense some wisdom to my protege. Plex took another sip and sat up a bit. You can conceal your intent by controlling your thoughts. By doing something similar to emptying your mind, you can prevent others from predicting your next action. Basically, if you aren't thinking about your next moves, then they have nothing to sense. That's why knights train their instincts, because if they move based on instinct instead of conscious thought, then they can't be predicted. Okay, and what about aura? That's a whole different deal. Controlling your aura isn't simply taught, otherwise everyone would be controlling it like intent. Your aura is your conscious thought and more. It can reveal your emotions, your character, the state of your body, even your memories. That's why they say aura is the bridge to the soul. His explanations made me realize that aura was far more complex than I thought. I had thought it was synonymous with intent. But it also confused me. I thought back to the past days at the magisterium. I had been writing formations in the air by infusing my psyche into my aura. This made my power appear externally, and the way to control my aura better was to simply practice controlling my aura with psyche. And thinking about it, I realized it was incredibly simple. Psyche was the power of the mind, and aura, while holding details about all aspects of yourself, was mainly a reflection of the mind. The power of the mind controlling a reflection of itself. Psyche was the perfect tool to control aura. Was this why I was able to get as far as I did despite being new to this whole thing? Then again, I didn't think other summoners were doing as I was. Perhaps it was just my luck, having something as expensive as my coat to help me break through that barrier with force. Suddenly, I narrowed my eyes at Plex. How did you learn to control aura? Me? Well, I had shown talent for it in the military, and they imparted some techniques to practice it. After that I was trained by someone and I learned aura concealment. So it can be taught. You just don't want to actually teach me. Hey, they were very complex techniques. Besides, you couldn't even use the practice technique. It was tailored to using vigor, not psyche. If you want something for you, go ahead and ask Maxwell. I already have a practice technique. That's why I'm asking about learning to conceal it. Plex's eyes turned a bit wide in surprise. Seeing a hint of skepticism though, I decided to prove it. Concentrating, I managed to write a few segments of my practice formation, the lines appearing in the air with a glow. I had gotten better after practicing, but there was still a long ways to go. It was enough to prove my ability to Plex though. After gawking a bit, he scoffed. You're a little monster, huh? I think this much talent is necessary in order to survive the trenches. A little narcissistic too. I smirked at his jab, earning a sigh. Whatever. Look, I'm not gonna spend the next 5 years training you to conceal your aura, but since we're inside this damned hunk of metal and I'm bored shitless, I don't mind throwing you a bone. Thanks. Just listen, and we'll find out how good your talent really is. Plex leaned back into his seat, rummaging through his memories and lecturing in a way that seemed as if he was reciting lines from a book rather than from his personal experience. I didn't mind much though, because anything that could give me hints was good enough. I was certain that being able to conceal my aura would become an invaluable tool as a ranged fighter, even beyond other applications of aura like what Apocryon showed me personally. Of course, Plex's lecture wasn't just a bunch of words that he spewed from that alcoholic mouth. He so generously showed off some spell formations, simultaneously warning me that they pretty much only worked for knights as they were formed from vigor, not psyche. Not that I could immediately use them anyway. The formations were incredibly complex, yet I still managed to guess that they were similar to the practice formation that Maxwell gave me. I primarily listened to all the theory about concealing your aura, how it involved not just a brutish method of containing it within your body, but obscuring it. Plex had long since mastered the method to obscure his aura, and now, he was skilled in the art of truly erasing his aura entirely, making his existence undetectable. Of course, he wasn't the best. Apparently, compared to some people that he knew of, his skills were barely adequate. At the same time though, these people he compared himself to were also the best in their field, and one of them was a rather legendary assassin. They were people who couldn't be found unless they wanted to be. Plex described the presence of that legendary assassin as fading. You could be looking right at them and your mind still wouldn't be able to process that there was a person in front of you. He even spoke of another whose presence wasn't fading, but so obscured that even a small glimpse at them would induce hallucinations and cause a small bout of hysteria and paranoia. Obscurity so great that it scrambled the minds of others, unable to be comprehended. In a tangent, he continued to explain that the ways to manipulate aura, despite their rarity, were incredibly vast. There was one point he eventually led me to though, and that was how you can only utilize one primary path of controlling your aura. For example, Plex could conceal his aura, but because he had practiced and mastered that method so much, he would never be able to learn how to induce mind-damaging hallucinations like Apocryon did. You could basically only choose one ability, and so he urged me to deliberate carefully whether I wanted to learn concealment or not. Because at a certain point, it became a path of no return. Of course, I didn't think I would regret learning concealment regardless of that fact. It was too useful, even if only people like Plex, who could make themselves invisible, could capitalize on the ability to its fullest. From there on, he continued to lecture. The talk only lasted a couple of hours since Plex didn't feel like continuing into the night. Eventually, the convoy settled for the night. The vehicles continued to roll, but all the bunks were filled as people retired. We couldn't settle for long though. Only an hour after everyone had gone to sleep, I suddenly woke to an explosion. An alarm went off, and everyone threw themselves out of bed. Enemy attack. It was the first real attack on the trip. It seemed like we would have to be on high alert from now on. I scrambled around a bit, as my entire bunk room was flooded with bodies. Because of that, despite the urgency, I waited for about half a minute as everyone got out of the way. When I was finally allowed to step out of my bunk, I headed straight for my turret. I always wore my coat since it was my greatest form of protection, especially on this dangerous trip, so I didn't need to equip it. Instead, I merely threw on my gloves and air mask before climbing into the little pillbox. From that vantage point, I was able to look around. The convoy stopped rolling after being intercepted. It seemed the enemies had prepared an ambush and managed to bring us to a halt. Not unlike us, they had vehicles of their own. They were small cars that had slammed into the vehicles in front of us, forcing us to stop. And from the safety behind these cars, warlocks launched spells while others ran over and tried to raid. Suddenly, I saw a bright fireball headed for me. I suddenly ducked, and my head was graced with a bit of worm as a few tongues of flame flickered through the window before fading. As I rose back up, I contacted the dimension of my authority. I found what I wanted, a rifle that looked somewhat similar to all the others with its wooden body, but holding a few key differences that made it a unique spirit. When I grabbed it, its memories flooded into me. This time, it was much smoother and more brief than the first time I had communed with it. Memories of a marksman from the American frontier. He wasn't known for his quick draw or skill with a pistol. Instead, he was known for his long-range shots. And he was made capable by the rifle in his hands, one of the first of its kind, potentially the progenitor to an entire line of an extremely popular modern weapon configuration. The sniper rifle. Of course, it could barely be considered such. The rifle was specifically known as the Remington Lee. It was the first rifle to utilize a box magazine and was a bolt-action rifle. The man in the memories had fought in the Spanish-American War and later attained this rifle privately after retiring from service. The rifle was then modified to mount a telescopic sight, technically making it a sniper rifle. And it was used as such. It was precisely tuned until he could reliably hit human-shaped targets at upwards of 250 meters away. He even opted for the heavy .45-70 Gov, allowing the rifle to pack enough punch to hunt even large game like bison. In the end, this rifle was heavily modified from its original factory configuration. It wasn't a well-known rifle and came from a time before the firearm revolutions of the Great War, but compared to the other rifles I could attain, this one was no doubt the best, especially at a range. I mounted this rifle on the window of the turret box, taking aim at the targets near the front of the convoy. They weren't more than 70 meters away, so I didn't have to adjust my aim as many would need to do with the slow .45-70. I placed the crosshair of my sight over the body of a wallrock casting magic from the roof of a vehicle. At the same time, I faintly recognized the markings of the Clockwork Association. Bang! I pulled the trigger, and despite aiming at the warlock's head, it was his chest that let out a violent puff of red. He collapsed at the same time, slumping off the vehicle. After that, racked another round, finding another target. My primary targets were the warlocks casting magic. Normally they couldn't be easily touched since they often cast magic barriers to combat incoming spells and knights had to close distance to harm them. And since bowmen were outclassed by warlocks, they basically didn't exist. But I defied all conventional notions of combat, being able to fire small projectiles at extreme speeds. These bullets were masterful at piercing magic barriers because of their size and instantaneous power, and so long as that happened, the warlock behind it would surely die with their soft, fleshy bodies. However, occasionally, there were some warlocks that wore garments with sufficient protective measures to stop a bullet. While shooting, I managed to find 3 of such warlocks. Unfortunately, these warlocks still died. It wasn't because their gear was lacking, but because it simply didn't cover their head. They never wore armor like knights, so their heads were normally exposed. This allowed me to simply place a bullet between their brows, even if I had already shot them. I found the opportunities to do so after they walked out from their cover. When my first shot failed, they would get startled before retreating behind their vehicles. But after realizing that I left behind nothing but a bad bruise, they got brave and came back out, only to meet their end seconds later. Like that, I basically took out every warlock in the ambush. And this was despite the hunker I was in getting attacked. I wasn't worried about my back, because the Tavera family was a family of knights. They were the best at close combat, so our vehicles would only get boarded in the worst case. Because of that, I would likely be the last one to get hurt or die in any battle we faced during this trip. I just needed to do my part in taking out the enemy's warlocks before they could do any real damage with powerful spells, something the Patriarch basically hired me to do in the first place. And I did my job perfectly. While breaking down magic barriers forced me to empower my bullets a bit, it was nothing I couldn't do with ease. So with that, the battle flipped. The Tavera Knights went on the offensive and killed everyone else after all the warlocks had died, since they no longer had to worry about incoming spells. And since I didn't want to accidentally shoot somebody, I stopped not long after. I watched as the battle concluded. The corpses and vehicles were looted for anything valuable like white crystals before being discarded. It was a bit eye-opening to see the knights pick up and throw the vehicles with only a bit of strain, the hunks of metal crashing off the side of the road and out of the convoy's way. And before long, we were back to rolling. Before I could sink back into bed though, the captain came and found me. "Thank you for your good work, John. We suffered only a few major injuries and no deaths. That wouldn't have been possible without you killing those warlocks. I must say, it's a bit surreal having such a major advantage like you with us to establish dominance. I understand why the Patriarch personally hired you." "Thanks, Captain. Expect more of it in the future. Unless it's a really powerful warlock, I should be able to kill them with only a few shots." We shook hands with a smile. To outright eliminate the threat of spells really was a game changer. Without me here, these knights would have to carve their way through the enemy knights in order to kill the other warlocks, and during that time, dozens of spells would rain down on top of them, potentially killing many before they could finally turn a battle into their favor. Even with your own warlocks, you had to wait and defend while the warlocks of both sides tried to kill each other. It could take a long time for that to happen and would similarly result in many more casualties. But I could directly eliminate them. Killing warlocks could be said to be my forte. So instead of the warlocks determining the tide of battle, that right had been given to me alone. The battle would be determined by how fast I could kill the opposing warlocks. The captain seemed to have discovered that this battle, which led to his next words. "Yes, you keep doing what you did tonight. I plan to have a meeting tomorrow to discuss this as well. With you here, all we have to do is wait until you can eliminate those warlocks. I want the others to understand this detail so we can adjust our tactics and reduce our injuries and deaths. Of course, I also want your input. If there is anything we should know, then do tell us." I couldn't help the slight anxiousness at the sudden proposal. The captain was basically saying that he would adjust their battle tactics to revolve around my ability to take out enemy warlocks. This meant that future battles would hinge on me alone. It was a sudden onset of responsibility that made me worry about whether or not I could perform. I was confident in my ability to kill warlocks, but now there were people who would be relying on me. If I failed, things could go wrong. Although I couldn't really think of any reasons besides a sheer power difference that would cause me to fail, I still initially shied away at the responsibility. But I was a variable that nobody had accounted for on this trip. This meant that the captain fully believed that he and his knights would need to kill all warlocks on their own. So even if I failed, the result could only be better than if I weren't here at all. I only brought benefits, regardless of how much. This thought brought back my confidence, but I still didn't intend to take full responsibility for the outcomes of these battles. This dictated my next response. I understand, Captain. I don't mind you changing tactics, but your knights still need to be ready to do things themselves. I alone can't win an entire battle, and I don't want people becoming complacent thinking they can just rely on someone else to keep them alive. That is natural, of course. I never intended to put everything on your shoulders. But my men will at least know that they can act more defensively instead of recklessly attempting to kill well-guarded warlocks. Sure. That's no problem. I'll do my best regardless, and those warlocks will be my first targets. So long as I'm not hindered, I don't see any reason why I can't get rid of them all. Very well. Our conversation concluded with that. Afterward, the convoy went back to sleep, and I went to bed with thoughts of accomplishment. Although we had cleanly avoided any deaths and dispatched the first wave of enemies with relative ease, the convoy was still on edge. Another attack could come at any time. I also overheard some conversations about displeasure among the fighters, their targets being the scouts. We were supposed to have people devoted to alerting the entire convoy in the event of an attack, giving us some time to prepare before being bombarded. Although it didn't seem like much, even just a few seconds could be valuable time to begin preparing. Apparently, that was the secondary job of the few warlocks who were on board. They knew spells that could detect anomalies in a wide area. And a few vehicles worth of people were definitely anomalous, so it was a wonder why we weren't alerted well in advance. Hearing about this didn't anger me much, but I also wasn't nearly as urgent as the others. They had to get out and fight, and without time to prepare their gear, they could be caught with their pants down. Sometimes literally. I didn't even have to go outside, just hiding away in a fortified pillbox with my rifle. But I still felt some empathetic indignation on behalf of the other fighters. In the last battle, injuries could have been avoided if the scouts did their job. Unfortunately, it seemed like I had initially been missing a few details. When evening of the next day dawned, I asked Plex about the situation while eating dinner. Apparently, the assassin and his missing partner had both killed and assumed the identities of 2 warlocks on the convoy, cutting down on the already small number of warlock personnel. After all, why wouldn't you attack the one glaring weakness of a convoy full of knights? Without warlocks, they would have a much harder time fighting back. And this made me even more valuable than before. It was no wonder why the captain wanted to revolve his defensive tactics around me. I was better at killing warlocks than other warlocks and made up for their weakness perfectly. Well, unless our enemies didn't find out who I was and specifically counter my actions, I could continue to work unhindered. Perhaps that was a bit much to ask though, because I had already established a high level of renown in the black market. I was too iconic, so perhaps it was only bound to happen. A matter of when, not if. Another day passed uneventfully, and the tension only grew despite not having been attacked again. We would arrive in only 3 more days. For the most part, I had been focusing on learning what I could from Plex. And the surprising part was how I actually made some progress. Through practicing the formation that Maxwell gave me, I was able to hone control over my aura. And through Plex's teachings I was actually able to restrain it, just slightly. It wasn't enough to make a big difference. Plex said that aura was like a shining light. Being able to restrain it only made the light dimmer, and I couldn't dim it much. To him, my aura was still as obvious as daylight. But the fact that I could even attempt to conceal it was shocking enough. It was so much so that he basically stopped teaching me after calling me a freak. Plex was one of the few people who knew that I hadn't even activated my first authority when I arrived at the capital. So to go from that to actually exercising control over aura in only a bit over half a year was baffling to say the least. I understood this as well, but it wasn't like I could apologize. Not even I knew why this was coming easily to me. Was I supposed to explain my talent somehow? Then again, I wondered in the back of my mind if my talent had something to do with the fact that I came from another world. My authorities and summons were obviously tied to my origins, so perhaps I really was given something special upon arrival. Well, to suddenly be thrown into a world of magic when I came from a world of nothing but science was a jarring change, so it was only right that I was given something to ensure my life here. Consider it compensation for being murdered by a robot truck. I found myself smiling. During the 4th day of travel, the scouts were on full alert at all times. We were expecting attacks at every hour of the day, and I was beginning to understand what Plex had told me at the beginning of our trip. People either became anxious or complacent as time went on, and the convoy had chosen the former. Nobody went without their gear on, and the atmosphere was constantly somber. It was like they were expecting to die or something, which made those with relatively good moods sour. I was included. I wasn't anxious, but it was difficult to be around a bunch of people with such bad moods. At some point, I was basically praying for the battle to hurry up and get here so that these knights would get out of their head and just swing a sword around. And maybe that's exactly why they waited so long. It was a mind game. The fourth day passed slowly, but it passed, and nothing happened even during the night. Plex told me to get some sleep and even to sleep in as long as I could. He said that they would strike when we were most vulnerable, and that was when everyone was tired. Sure enough, the fifth day rolled around, and nothing happened so long as the sun was up. As soon as the moon came out though and night fell, it happened. Enemy spotted. There was a yell, and from under my covers, my eyes shot open. The entire convoy woke up. We hadn't even gotten an hour of sleep, but we were forced out of bed. And not long after, I heard the explosions. Except, unlike the first time, this explosion rocked the entire hunker. I was thrown out of my bed as the vehicle quaked, threatening to roll onto its side. But it righted itself under gravity, and everyone continued to rush out. "Have fun, John," Plex yelled while disappearing, causing me to scoff before rushing to my turret. Peeking through the window, I spotted an enemy convoy toward both our front and back. We were brought to a standstill, and the frontmost and rearmost vehicles were being raided. Spells also came en masse, flipping the smaller trucks and exploding amidst our knights. They were responding with trained reactions, but several already had wounds. I didn't delay, communing with my scoped rifle and taking aim. My priority, as discussed with the captain, was to take out the warlocks. That was my only job, and how many people died hinged on my performance. It was a lot of pressure, especially now that it was time to make true on my promises. But I pushed myself to step up. Judging by the strength of their spells and what seemed like thick magical barriers in front of them, I could guess that the warlocks were more powerful this time around. So I empowered my rifle with a large amount of Psycha before finding my target and pulling the trigger. Bang! An explosion rang out through the battlefield as I felt the gun recoil into my arm. On the other end, I could see the warlock drop with blood spraying from his neck. It seemed I missed both his head and his chest, but managed to hit the side of his neck, taking out an artery. Well, he was also about 110 meters away, this intuitive sense of distance coming from the memories within the rifle. With that shot, I shook off some of my nerves. "You're good, John. You're good at your job. Just keep shooting. Slow and steady." I took a deep breath, settling my heart before taking aim again. However, before I could shoot another target, I suddenly saw a spell fly toward me. I ducked, and there was a large explosion of fire. Ow! Warm! I winced as a tongue of fire licked my face, singeing some of my facial hair and burning me a bit. After taking a moment, I put on my air mask before lifting back up. However, I could see more spells coming at me. I ducked as another fireball threatened to burn my air mask. Shit. They know it's me. I can't shoot like this. I realized that they had prepared specifically for me. Without me, they would have an easier time taking out the knights. I couldn't allow it, so I moved to another turret. But after firing a single shot, I was once again suppressed. Fuck. Fine. I'll go meet you myself. Since when have I been scared of close combat? Pulling out of the turret, I kicked open the door of the hunker and headed outside. All around me, I could see knights battling each other. The strength they wielded gave me goosebumps, reminding me just how weak I was in front of those types of magi. But I was being protected by them, and I couldn't let those damned warlocks do as they pleased. So I ran to a good location before taking aim, finding a warlock and firing. Bang! My gun flashed, and another warlock died. Of course, I was also spotted, and because they saw me beyond the metal fortifications of the hunker, I was attacked. I quickly ran behind one of the trucks as a spell hurtled toward me. Not all the ranged spells were fire, but they all had the familiar flashes of magic spells, giving them away. After that spell exploded where I was once standing, I relocated and fired off another shot. That shot didn't kill the warlock though, his barrier stopping it. These guys are strong. I muttered before relocating once again. I had to keep moving and shooting. And since that previous warlock was strong, I avoided him and targeted the others. Over time, I managed to kill 4 more warlocks with empowered shots. I also found 3 warlocks were strong enough to block my bullets. But with the pressure eased, the knights were doing noticeably better. In fact, we were pushing them back. I also wasn't getting focused as much, giving me more room to shoot. And it was all downhill from there. Our momentum snowballed as I continued to shoot those strong warlocks. I couldn't kill them since they kept strengthening their barriers, but my efforts still made them hide away. If they didn't avoid me, then I would eventually pierce through. But if they hid away, then they couldn't attack the knights. In fact, I managed to kill one because he thought he could strengthen his barrier before I could fire twice. Unfortunately, he underestimated my fire rate and one of my bullets snuck through after shattering his barrier, blowing a hole through his head. However, perhaps because I stayed in one spot for longer than normal, another spell was thrown at me. And it wasn't one from one of the weak warlocks. Those I had killed. No, one of the strong ones decided to focus on me. And I barely noticed when the spell was already heading toward me. I saw as a large ball of water came flying in my direction. It didn't look harmful, but I could feel the magical energy contained inside of it, which made me panic. In that moment, my jacket lit up with purple lines. I felt my mind speed up, everything around me suddenly moving in slow motion. And I threw my body out of the way, my muscles straining themselves to move as I commanded. Thankfully, that was enough to avoid eating the entire spell with my body. I dodged, the spell landing beside me. But then it exploded, and I was hit with a dense wave of water backed by shockingly powerful pressure. It was like being hit with a shock wave. The water dug into my side, and while it was stopped by the jacket, the impact still slammed into my arm and shook my organs. I was thrown a small distance, tumbling around before coming to a stop. Ack! I groaned as my head spun, but the adrenaline going through my body forced me to wake up despite the pain. I lifted my head, barely taking in the surrounding sights and making sure there were no enemies. I managed to catch a glimpse of the warlock who launched that spell, and the sight was a bit shocking. There was a knife going through his chest, and from over his shoulder, I could see Plex smiling at me. Plex dropped what was now a corpse before disappearing once again. I sighed, deciding that it was okay to take a few more seconds on the floor. With that, the battle was basically over. By the time I pulled myself up, the last few enemy knights were killed while any remaining warlocks were killed by Plex. I didn't even have the chance to shoot anymore. But I had done enough. A majority of the warlocks were killed by me despite having been suppressed for a while, taking away almost all the pressure on the knights. I even killed one of the strong ones. When I remembered how I was actually being paid for killing enemies, I couldn't help the foolish grin that surfaced. Heh, I've been counting too. This is gonna be one hell of a paycheck. John. My head suddenly turned at the call of the captain. He came walking over with a half smile. Thank you, John, once again. You helped us immensely. It's all right, Captain. How is everyone? Well, this battle wasn't as forgiving as the first. The captain explained the casualties. We had sustained a few deaths and several injuries. The healers would need to work overtime to heal all the wounded. We were also stopping for a time in order to recuperate. Heading forward would only be throwing ourselves into more enemies. In fact, the captain was entertaining the idea of driving the convoy backward for a while in order to recover before pushing forward once again, just in case there were enemies headed our way. But all things considered, we were still doing very well. They had expected many more deaths than this. I alone was saving many lives with my efforts. Well, I had to eat the explosion of a spell in the end, but otherwise I was getting off lightly. I also apologize for not being able to protect you. There's not much we can do about spells, so we couldn't keep you from getting suppressed. Still, your performance was great despite that. The captain gave his apologies, but I just reassured him. I had worked around it, and I couldn't expect perfect conditions while everyone was fighting for their lives. After a short discussion, we separated, the captain leaving to gather reports and help out. On the other hand, I retreated to the hunker where I took off my coat and took a look at my injury. My arm was bruised, as was my side, the surrounding skin turning a bit purple. But otherwise, I was completely fine. My head hurt more than anything, and I would have no issue shooting a gun right now if I needed to. The coat really was an amazing item. At the same time though, I wondered what level that warlock had been at. That attack was powerful, and if not for my coat's abilities, I wouldn't have reacted in time to dodge as much as I did. And in that situation, the blast from the water spell would have done far more damage than it did. Authority 6? I've only really had experience with Authority 4s and 5s, so I'm probably right since he was quite a bit stronger. You know, I wonder how strong people within these mafias are at the higher ranks? As I questioned, I suddenly saw Plex walk into the hunker. I decided to ask and waved him down. Plex? Yes, my name is Plex. How strong was the warlock you killed? Authority 5, at its height. Oh. I guess my estimation was a bit off. The strong warlock I killed probably wasn't at Authority 6 either. But this also gave me a reference for my limits. So I probably can't kill an Authority 6 warlock. Not unless you catch them off guard, and that gets rarer the higher their level. Plus, you can't compare these guys to those of the military, at least not the good ones. There are some techniques called perpetual spells that a warlock can maintain at all times, and they almost always use it for mana barriers. So you won't be able to instantly kill anybody competent, not unless you get much more powerful than you are. And many of these guys within the mafias aren't quite competent, at least not at the lower levels. Disappointing. Hey, be grateful you can kill anybody above your level anyway. I'll give it to you, John. Your summons really are something special. But they aren't impossible to fight against. You'll figure this out as you climb the ranks and become less able to kill those far above you. Yeah, I figured. I could only nod, because I had thought of those things too. The only reason I didn't fret though was because my enemies were beginning to shift. In the future, I would be fighting more beasts than people, and they required a different set of tactics. Intelligence was much less of a problem. Instead, sheer power and crowd control was the name of the game. At least from what I've experienced so far. But so long as I was at the Magisterium, I knew that I would probably continue to take on jobs in the black market, especially if my services were requested like in this case. So I would still need to hone my skill in the art of human warfare, because right now, fighting people was far deadlier than fighting beasts. It was with these thoughts that I retired for the night. I didn't particularly care about what the captain had planned for the convoy. My only job was to respond when needed. But, in the back of my mind, I was also worried about the target on my back that seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. Another attack. The next morning, when the sun was only just beginning to peek over the horizon, everyone was woken by alarms and the yell of a warlock. Usually if I got less than 8 hours of sleep, I would feel groggy and even a bit sick. But I didn't feel any of that as the explosions of magical spells rattled the hunker and woke me with a surge of adrenaline. 5 a.m.? These guys really need to fuck off. My nerves had died down as of late. A couple of sudden battles was enough to condition me, at least to the point where I wasn't in a constant state of fight or flight and hyper-awareness. That was the only reason some of my irritation could slip through as I climbed up into a turret and took aim. I immediately took count, finding about 13 warlocks posted not just in their own vehicles, but in the forest beyond the road. We had hit a roadblock of boulders that seemed to have been placed by the enemy warlocks, and now we were being pincered from both sides. And this time, the warlocks seemed to be hiding behind natural formations a bit more, not just standing out in the open where I could shoot them. It made this more difficult, and because the sun wasn't fully out yet, it was a bit harder to see into the tree-line. But with my scope, things were made easier. Plus, the lights from their spells made them stand out like beacons, guiding my crosshair. Learning from prior battles, every warlock had a barrier up, and all of them were strengthened. They were specifically countering me, and not every warlock was casting spells. They seemed to be searching. In fact, several were looking toward my hunker. It was clear that I had caused them no small headache, and perhaps now they were trying to do something about it. I knew that the moment I took a shot, I would probably be bombarded with spells. And if I stepped outside to try and reposition, then I would be putting myself in danger. So they wanted to pin me down or eliminate me entirely. So I waited, thinking of what I could do to help with this battle while avoiding the focus fire of a dozen warlocks. And then, it hit me. Why did I have to only shoot the warlocks? Why not the knights? I would have to use more power, but if I switched guns as well then killing several knights wouldn't be a problem. But going outside at all was still a problem, even if I had more freedom out there as opposed to in a stationary turret. Suddenly, I thought of my most glaring problem besides the sounds my guns made. It was the muzzle flash, which was incredibly obvious considering how much I stood out in general. If I got rid of that, I would be golden. The sound was so loud that it couldn't be precisely traced at a distance, so I could still operate despite it. That's when I had an idea. Kicking open the door of the hunker, I headed out and crouched down. And looking at the vehicle, I smiled. Suddenly, I crawled under the hunker itself, taking up position on the ground. From there, I could see up to everyone's waist, and it was easy to tell apart the Tavera knights from the enemy knights. After that, I aimed my rifle. The knights were always much closer than the warlocks, so I didn't have to stress my aim. And since I was now under this vehicle, I couldn't be hit by the warlocks. It was the perfect solution, so I aimed at an enemy knight with a smile, pulling the trigger. Bang! My bullet flew, and the knight that I shot buckled almost instantly. It gave a window of opportunity that the Tavera knight took immediate advantage of. With that, I let off round as fast as I could send them. I had to infuse a large amount of Psycha into each round just for the bullet to pierce through both armor and the tough bodies of the knights. But I quickly learned that my shots didn't have to be lethal for them to be effective. Suddenly getting hit by a bullet was a death sentence when you were also fighting against an enemy. It was a fatal distraction. So I even lightened up on the Psycha, focusing on my fire rate. And like that, the knights swept through their enemies. I didn't even have to kill the warlocks. With my assistance, the knights were able to pierce through all defenses and kill them for me. And I wasn't disturbed a single time, the enemy warlocks unable to deduce my position underneath the vehicle and behind the bodies of my fellow knights. And so the battle was won. After I crawled out, I could see everyone either getting treated or cleaning up. The captain also came and found me. "John, excellent work." "Thank you, Captain." I smiled at his enthusiasm while we shook hands. "I saw exactly what you were doing, and I have to say that it was a genius tactic. In fact, because those stupid warlocks couldn't find you, they stood around hiding for half the battle. Just your presence alone is enough to disable them. And don't worry, even though you didn't kill anybody, you allowed us to kill those knights far faster than otherwise. I'll make sure you are paid for this battle. Just doing my duty, sir." I felt a bit shameless, saying that while grinning ear to ear. I had to admit, the huge paycheck this was turning out to be was a great motivator. However, this battle did indeed take a larger toll on me. Even though I was smiling, my head was screaming at me with a migraine after using so much Psycha. I felt like I would pass out any moment. So I kept our conversation short, and my next stop was the bunk where I fell right asleep. I couldn't even be bothered with breakfast, and I slept until well afternoon. Of course, I woke up to a starving stomach because of that. Thankfully I had been saved some food, not by Plex, but by some of the knights. I was thanked to no end while eating, probably because they had received my direct help. I was also guaranteed protection by the entire troop, so it was nice to know that everyone would be looking out for me. I just told them to make sure nobody attacked the hunker, because it had basically become my nest. If I lost that, then I would be in serious trouble. After that, evening dawned. After this, we would only have to make it through one more day. We would arrive the following evening, and so far, everything was going amazing. I had barely been hurt, and deaths were minimal. Injuries were prevalent, of course, but in normal cases most of those injured knights would be dead. I had saved no small amount of lives, and even though the last battle was more difficult than the other, I thought we could make it through the rest smoothly. Unfortunately, thinking that seemed to have conjured quite the opposite. Because when the moon appeared high in the sky, I was once again shocked awake by all too familiar explosions. Thankfully I was rested, so I didn't have issues responding. But when I saw what we were up against, I could only curse under my breath. It looked like an army was waiting for us. Of course, we had an army of our own, but we were tired. Thinking back, I suppose the healers had it the worst. Well, they would need to step it up pretty soon. Because when attacks were launched, copious amounts of blood was shed. And the pressure I was put under skyrocketed as these enemies sought the head of the American who had been causing no small amount of trouble. Shit. Break through. Get those fucking vehicles out of the way. Ack. Someone kill that warlock. Bang. Screams and gunshots made my ears ring. I suppose I was finally getting a small taste of what war was like on Earth, in this case. Thankfully, my air mask filtered what I breathed, so I didn't get the dense stench of blood and fire. It was my only solace during these battles. While fighting, I thought back a couple of times to what I had surmised at the beginning of the trip. My conclusion was that the final days of the trip would be the hardest since the enemy would be more desperate, throwing everything they had at us. I knew it was bound to come, especially since I was here keeping a vast majority of the convoy alive through every battle. But I underestimated just how difficult it was going to be. Well, I couldn't be blamed either. After all, I didn't expect that another mafia would come and try to bar our path. For most of the time, we had been facing the Clockwork Association. But on the last day, not only did we fight 2 back-to-back battles with those damned warlocks, but another mafia known as the Young Guild suddenly appeared. They were supposedly a rival mafia that operated in the only black market in the city of Joffrin, our destination. And through the shouts and screams of battle with them, I learned that the Tavera family was attempting to encroach on their territory there. These mafias were more widespread than I initially thought. They had slices of the black markets of several major cities. There were even entire villages that they controlled, these small settlements acting as places for their families to grow and produce more children who would later be inducted into the mafias. Of course, the capital was always where most of their power resided, so I wasn't missing much. But that was beside the point. There were naturally other mafias than the few I knew of, most being entirely localized to a single city. But that didn't mean they weren't powerful, and because they only had one nest, they didn't take kindly to others trying to intrude. Well, I knew there was more to the story, but that was all above my pay grade. I was only hired muscle who needed to help them reach their goals. Still, whatever the Tavera family was doing, it was enough to garner what seemed like the full force of their rivals. I wondered several times through the trip why our enemies didn't just send their full armies all at once. Surely it would be more effective, right? But this was wrong. Wearing down your enemy was effective, and striking when they were tired and when you were well prepared was the best. And, well, what they struck with when all was on the line seemed like their full army. It was like everything beforehand had only been a warm-up. Dozens of knights, many of which were terrifyingly powerful, and just as many warlocks. Not only that, but I finally got to experience a full-force battle between not Authority 6, but Authority 7s. Turns out, the captain was an Authority 7 knight, as well as the strongest person in this convoy. And after asking Plex, the highest power in a mafia usually stood around Authority 9. For the Tavera family, that was their patriarch. So sending an Authority 7 was big. After all, although the highest power was Authority 9, that didn't mean they had many Authority 8s. The Tavera family may have 2, at best 4, and leaving the capital wasn't usually acceptable under any circumstances. So Authority 7 was the best we had. Not that it was shabby. The captain was at the height of Authority 7 as well as someone who had served for many years in the military. He was experienced and powerful. And this showed in the battle he fought. Honestly, the entire thing made me want to cower. Atrocious strength and speed was basically all there was to it. The captain could create craters in the ground with his feet, tear apart an entire vehicle with his hands, jump higher than trees could grow, and attack with speed that my eyes couldn't keep up with. I quite literally wouldn't last a second if I had to fight him. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he could dodge my bullets. Of course, displaying such feats of strength took a lot out of him. There was a reason he didn't show such strength earlier. And perhaps more shocking was the enemy he fought, who was likewise a knight, but not the type you'd think. He was a martial arts specialist, someone who fought with his body. He wasn't just a boxer who only fought with his fists either. His kicks could take out the trunk of a tree, his fists blowing holes in steel, his arms and abs able to deflect blades, and his footwork allowing him to reposition with blinding speed and impossible agility. His body just floated around while he attacked the captain, and their fights took them to all corners of the battlefield. In one moment, they'd be right in the center of a dozen men, and the next, they would be flying over the treeline and laying into each other on the other side of a hill. Their power wasn't something I could wrap my head around. It was disorienting seeing it at all, because it was stuff I had only seen in movies and the like. To actually see it in the flesh jostled my brain. It was like it didn't want to think that it was possible. But the damage they wrought was very real. I could only thank the captain for keeping that pugilist from tearing apart the hunker I was hiding inside. But, other than that distraction, I was wholly occupied with trying to stay alive. For the entire final day, we bounced from battle to battle. It was like there was a long line of people just waiting down the road and taking turns beating us up. And every time, we sustained more damage. It built up. More deaths, more injuries, and greater exhaustion. We were lucky our convoy was large, because any less people and we may not have been able to make it this far. And there was no opportunity to rest. At first it was manageable. I would get tired, restrain my use of Psycha, and gradually recover between battles. But as each hour passed, my mind's fatigue built bit by bit. First it was a constant headache, but then it turned into sharp pains that made me flinch with every surge of blood from my heart. Not only that, but I was attacked rather often. I had thought that I could just hide like I had, whether that was amidst the knights or around the hunker. But no matter where I went, it wouldn't be long before I was spotted by a knight or warlock and attacked. Running away from bloodthirsty knights was especially fun. My speed couldn't compare to theirs, so I was forced to move as fast as I could, delaying them with a shotgun, before getting an ally to save me. That scenario played out 4 times, and each time, I was pulled closer to death. The warlock spells that exploded around me weren't much better. No small amount of damage was blocked by my coat, but I still sustained several nasty bruises and a possible fracture in my left arm after getting slammed in the side by a large rock. Holding up a rifle became harder after that, and how I continued to manage was a miracle. But I did, even though I sometimes wanted to climb into the hunker and just hide for a while. But my willpower was strong. If there was one thing that I knew about myself, being one of my better qualities, was that I didn't buckle under pressure. Something about adversity like this spurred something within me, compelling me to step up and push back. It was a quality that only came out during sports, but here, it showed itself in full force when it really mattered. Despite the head-splitting migraines, despite the blood that dripped down my arm from a wound under my sleeve, despite the physical and mental exhaustion from trying to help while being hunted by knights and warlocks, I found it within me to continue surviving. And I never stopped shooting back. Ha! Ugh! I lay against one of the trucks while catching my breath, groans coming from underneath my mask. I felt some blood stream down the side of my head, a small wound from a small rock that came flying in from seemingly nowhere. What hurt the most though wasn't the wound it gave me, but the impact it had against my head that was already dealing with the nastiest headache of my life. Not only that, but my left arm throbbed with shooting pains every time my heart beat. It had been that way for more than a few hours now, and moving my fingers had gradually become more difficult. I concluded that my arm was broken, but unfortunately I couldn't get it treated in the middle of a battle. I barely even remember how I got that injury. In fact, so much as opening my eyes felt overwhelming. There was too much stimulation, the battle overwhelming my senses. But I couldn't close my eyes just in case I had to dodge another spell, nor could I just tune my hearing out and ignore what was going on. In the distance, I could see all the knights intertwined in fights. The tides were turning in our favor, the enemies of the young guild falling beneath the sabers of the Tavera family. Pulling my gaze away, I looked toward the hunker not far away. From their turrets, the few warlocks that we brought were launching the occasional spell. Unlike me who could get hit by fire and water that easily slipped through the window, they had barriers that could block all that stuff, letting them fire freely. Looking at that tank on wheels, I felt the urge to go over and climb inside. I just wanted some rest, and surely the hunker's defenses could afford me that. But at the same time, there was still more I could do. I learned through much pain that maintaining a communion with a gun basically cost as much psyche as I passively recovered. This meant I could keep a gun in my hands and shoot unempowered bullets as much as I wanted. Of course, bullets that weren't infused with psyche weren't as powerful. Depending on the conditions, the best they could do was pierce a knight's armor and damage a warlock's barrier, yet do nothing to the body underneath. But in this battle, those two things were enough. So when I ran out of energy, that's what I resorted to, trying to afford my allies any advantage I could. After all, a bullet to the face, although not enough to kill a knight, was still a nasty distraction equal to a sucker punch. And if I was lucky enough to hit their eyeball or mouth, then even unempowered bullets became lethal. Unfortunately, my accuracy also lowered when I was exhausted, so those chances were low. Still, my bullets afforded our knights many opportunities, sometimes outright securing kills. So I couldn't stop. The only tough part was that, with every shot, I needed to move. Having my position locked down was a death sentence, so if I wasn't ready to run, then I didn't want to shoot. Even the air mask couldn't keep me going forever. In fact, I had eaten food on the battlefield during a morning battle, trying to keep my energy levels up. Taking a piss also wasn't out of the question, though doing so while watching out for spells was an interesting experience. Ugh, damn it. I just need a breather. There's food there too, and I'm starving right now. I grunted before deciding to head over. I ducked low before slowly making my way, arriving at the beat-up door to head inside. But that's when I heard something in the distance. A scream, getting louder and heading my way. I looked up. Grah! Boom! A body came flying through the air, hitting the side of the hunker like a cannonball. It was that Authority 7 pugilist from the young guild. The captain wasn't able to kill him in the first battle, so he left before coming back again in a later battle for a rematch. He seemed to be getting his ass kicked once again. But, when he landed on the hunker, my neck tingled as I stared blankly. It folded under his body, the tank warping before flying off its wheels and into the air. I watched as the door, that was once right in front of me, flew a small distance away. The entire tank rolled a few times before gradually coming to a stop. And then, the pugilist clawed his way out of the metal. When he emerged, his eyes fell onto me who was now standing out in the open, frozen. Seeing the gun in my hand, he smiled brightly. You! Get over here and die, you fucking American! He snarled and threw his body toward me. My coat's abilities activated, but even in slow motion, his hand moved too fast for me to react to. I watched, feeling my soul leaving my body as if to try and avoid that monster in human skin. But, right as he was going to grab my head in his huge hand, I saw a line of silver arrive to the side. The pugilist's eyes went wide, and I saw blood bloom from his wrist. He had been relieved of his hand, pulling away with a scream. But that hand was still heading toward me, even if no longer attached to its owner. I tried to tilt out of the way, but those fingers still graced the right side of my head. Slice! Arg! It felt like I was slapped, heading to the floor as I felt a jolt of pain go through my head. At the same time, I felt a horrible sting where my right temple was. I already knew what happened. Fuck! What are those nails? I touched where I felt the wounds, and blood dripped down my fingers when I pulled away. The nails of that pugilist were as sharp as knives. Was there any part of a knight's body that couldn't kill me? Now, there were some lacerations across the side of my head. Not only that, but the stinging I felt only got worse as my headache became manageable. There was some foreign power that was making it hurt, probably the power of vigor that knights wielded. I've heard that at higher levels they can emit some. It was how Plex made himself invisible, and swordmasters could use it to release blades from their swords. Now, this power ate at my wounds, making it hurt much more than it should. And that was just a scratch from that man. Of course, he was in a much sorrier state. Ah, my hand. You son of a bitch. John, let me handle this meathead. The captain dashed in and appeared before me, yelling out those words as if I was even able to do otherwise. With that, I ran away while the captain drove that pugilist back. With one less hand, there was no way he could win now. And that was basically the end of the battle. Not long later, our knights killed every last warlock and enemy fighter, not allowing anybody to retreat. By now, the sun was setting, so it was getting darker and cooler. Nobody even cheered when the battle was finished. They were just that exhausted. As for me, I overlooked the hunker that had served as my nest for the past several days. It was crumbled, now only a pile of metal. The two warlocks that had been inside those turrets were now piles of meat somewhere inside the debris. They had died instantly, not even to an intentional attack. I thought, if I had been any faster in boarding it in order to take a small rest and grab some food, I would have died without even knowing how. Everything would have been over, just like that. This new life of mine would be finished, and everything I'd built up so far would have been for nothing. And I would never have returned to Rayla, who was worried and waiting for me back at the capital. She would have been left alone, and I would have caused her grief that she may never have recovered from. It was a sickening feeling, one that terrified me more than anything. And for a moment, I thought that perhaps this kind of life wasn't for me, that I was better off just sticking to some ordinary job in the capital while leading a life away from all forms of hostility. The thought that I could so easily die like that, despite everything I did to avoid it, ate away at my mind. But then, I looked around at everyone else. Those who survived did so in part because of me. I played perhaps the largest part in securing the lives of those in this convoy than any other person here aside from the captain. Without me, they would have suffered far more casualties. It was why the captain had emphasized my importance after every single battle we fought. I was making a very real and noticeable difference. And soon enough, I would be putting this skill of mine to work not against people, but against beasts who threatened the entire human race of this world. In short, the sense of duty I felt overruled my fear. The thought of being able to turn the tides of any battle and save the lives of my allies infected my mind, turning fear into strength that brought out a deep sense of valor. After that, it was like the pain I felt turned into fuel for that fire. I couldn't say that this was inspiring a sense of purpose in me. These battles were between mafias, and I wasn't a part of one. I was hired muscle. I was doing this for money and to earn a reputation with figures of authority. Very little of this was something to be proud of, not that it was something to be ashamed of either. But through these battles, I knew I was growing. It would only make me better so that when the day came that I turned my guns against the true plague of this world, I could do so with even greater violence. And I would save more people. That way, perhaps I could avoid praying for the dead as much as I have been recently. Standing before the hunker, I bowed my head and thought of those two warlocks who I had almost joined in death, wishing that despite everything, they would find peace. We arrived at the city of Joffrin. Our convoy was missing a hunker and a truck, along with most of the cargo that had been lost with the destruction of those two vehicles. But all things considered, the trip was a massive success. That pugilist had died to Plex after he almost killed me, and we either decimated or repelled every army that came our way. We had many casualties, at least a third of our forces dead and everyone being injured in some way. But we had made it. At the very least, we killed much more than we lost. And since the majority of the cargo had arrived in good condition, the job was a resounding success. Despite how conspicuous it was, all the trucks aside from the other hunker rolled directly into this city. I sat atop one of the trucks, getting a good look at this city. It wasn't as grand as the capital, that was for sure. But it had its own charm to it. I couldn't be impressed because the capital was basically the greatest center for humanity's prosperity in this world, but that didn't mean new things weren't cool to see. This city had one massive palace at its center, one that seemed to act as a hub for all kinds of business. In fact, there was one massive road that led straight to that palace in the city center from the gates we entered through. The road was straight and nearly 2 miles long. I could also see thousands of people and wagons occupying it. And as our battered vehicles drove down that road, we pulled plenty of heads. We were already conspicuous without looking as beat up as we did, so the scars of battle that littered the trucks only added to it. And then there was I who sat above everyone's head. You could see my torso wrapped in bandages from beneath my coat and my arm hanging in a sling. Not only that, but I occasionally took puffs from a cigar. Cough. I'll need to get used to this. After letting out a breath of smoke, I felt my lungs spasm before I muttered those words. This cigar wasn't some kind of drug despite what it looked like. I had actually been surprised by its existence when the captain came around and handed one to me. It was basically a revitalizer. The cigar was made from some special magical materials and infused with a bit of vigor. This made it almost medicinal in nature, capable of relieving the pain from wounds and helping the body recover with the fortifying power of vigor. My recovery pills were basically the same thing, except the cigar could last much longer and was more potent. They weren't cheap, but with the money I was about to receive alongside my savings, it wasn't much. I learned where to get more from the captain, who said it was actually a product created by Apocreon and bought by the Tavera family, giving them sole rights to produce and sell it. The cigars were a popular product of theirs, especially among knights due to their infusion of vigor. Not only that, but these cigars were part of the reason for this trip. Apparently there was a vital ingredient that could only be found near this city, so securing the production of the cigars required them to invest in this place. This convoy contained the investment, though there was naturally much more to it than just that. Anyway, I decided I would buy some when I got back to the capital. While thinking of that, we eventually made it to Joffrin's black market. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time nor interest in exploring this city. After the convoy linked with their headquarters, I went to go meet with the captain. However, upon arriving in the central area of their headquarters within this foreign black market, I saw that he was speaking to someone, and one that seemed rather noble. It was a woman, and just by looking at her I could sense deep power. It was definitely above Rayla, so she had to be at least authority 9. She had ashen gray hair and wore dark robes accentuated with purple. Her face was sharp, yet there was an undeniable air of maturity around her. She almost looked familiar, but I wasn't in the mind to care much about that. Just watch yourself within my city. I don't want another war like that anytime soon. Cross a certain line, and I'll be forced to do something about it. At the very least, keep things discreet. Of course, Duchess. My patriarch also sends his good graces and wishes to hold a discussion with you. I hold his contact information, if you would like it. Very well. Agreeing, this Duchess exposed her aerial and touched it to the captains, exchanging information. Then, he gave a small bow. Thank you, Duchess. Sure. Be sure to. Who are you? Suddenly, the Duchess turned toward me, who had been lingering to the side. Surprised that she was bothering with me, I just nodded to her. My name is John, Duchess. You look injured, John. Summoner? Yes, ma'am. Young and authority 3. Are you enrolled in the magisterium? I am. I see. She nodded, and suddenly, the captain chimed in. Duchess, John is an exceptionally powerful summoner that the Patriarch personally hired to help us defend the convoy. His potential is great. Well, Authority 3 can't do anything for me right now. Nonetheless, I will keep in contact. Please settle yourselves with haste. I don't enjoy my city being chaotic. Of course, Duchess. And John. She looked at me. Remember the name Teleria. Yes, ma'am. With that odd request, the captain and I exchanged goodbyes with her. She left the markets, and I finally got to speak with the captain who sighed. She runs this city, yet has a major hand in the operation of the black markets here. We cooperate with her directly. Anyway, How are your wounds, John? You were pretty battered after that last battle. I've never been afraid of scars. I smiled while remembering the aftermath of the battle. Because the healer was stretched to his limits, anybody with superficial wounds was forced to either wait or just heal normally. Despite that, I had actually been offered to get healed considering my contributions to the convoy, but I had turned it down. The healer checked me anyway though, and when he discovered my broken arm, he didn't let me refuse treatment. At the very least, he forced me to get my arm realigned, which I decided wasn't a bad idea. So the bones of my forearm were successfully repositioned, and through magic, secured in place and the fracture fused. After that my arm was wrapped with a splint and hung in a sling. Recovery pills and the cigar in my mouth helped all my other wounds take care of themselves. However, there was one wound that wasn't as easily dealt with. The wound from the pugilist's fingernails was infused with destructive vigor, creating 2 lacerations on the left side of my head. The lacerations went from my temple beside my eyebrow to the back of my head above my ear. It looked like I had been clawed by a monster, and that wasn't really far from the truth. And because of the vigor, the wounds weren't easily healed. In fact, until now I wasn't sure if all the vigor was actually gone. The lacerations had begun to heal, but they were taking much longer than my other wounds. Plex told me that it would leave a nasty scar, but it wasn't like my body didn't have plenty of those, so I didn't mind. After assuring Captain Ignov that I was fine, he went on to once again praise my work. It was like he wanted to make sure I wouldn't leave without knowing how important I was to their success. I felt weird receiving all the compliments, especially since people died. It barely felt like a success right now. In the end though, he settled down and I told him about my intentions to leave. Of course, John. You've earned both rest and your paycheck. Here, I wrote this up a couple hours ago. Suddenly, he took an envelope out of his coat pocket, handing it to me. It was sealed with wax and the symbol of the Tavera family, with some slight modifications. It was probably a personal seal. I took it with curiosity. When you get back to the capital, hand that to the Patriarch. He'll pay you out then. And don't worry about the kill counts. I think you'll more than appreciate the bonuses I've stipulated. All right. I nodded and stashed the envelope. I trusted the captain's word, so I didn't feel the need to verify anything. And if I was being honest, I would be fine accepting nothing more than the base pay without the kill count bonus. It was odd how going through hardship made you more of a generous person, not that I still wasn't raking in coin from this job anyway. Oh, and here. For your travels. Reaching into his coat once more, Captain Ignov pulled out another item. I recognized it rather quickly. It was a metal cigar case. It looked brand new, its faces made with deep gold and engraved with dark red designs. The red designs were of roses and leaves, and the colors were so vibrant that it seemed like an actual painting. This is one of our signature cigar cases, owned by many high-profile elites within the kingdom since it's the best of its kind on the market, along with the best looking. It's designed to preserve the magical potency of those cigars. Go ahead and use it. I was silent as I pressed a latch on the side of the case, popping it open. On one side of the case, there were 5 loops to hold more cigars, 3 of which were filled. And on the other side there was a fancy lighter constructed from an entire white crystal as well as a cigar cutter. After closing it, I looked back toward the captain. Is it all right for me to have this? How much are these? Well, you can't really buy them, otherwise they wouldn't be very valuable. Besides, I don't think the Patriarch would mind. We give them to friends of the family and circulate them among elites and royalty. And you, John, are a friend of the family. If not, you wouldn't have been called to help us on this trip. Oh. Well, I guess I can only give my thanks. It was feeling like an honor to receive this cigar case, as odd as that was. I wasn't sure how to respond except with a thank you. Captain Ignov smiled and smacked my shoulder. You're a good one, kid. Better than Plex, I reckon. I heard that. Suddenly, Plex appeared beside us, causing the captain to click his tongue. Sneaky as always. By the way, I could have handled that brute from Yun by myself. Yes, but then I wouldn't be getting paid for his head. And that's why John here is better. Go on and get out of here. The rails leave in about 3 hours, so you better head over and get a ticket. With that, Plex and I said our goodbyes, leaving behind the captain who was now assigned to this city. I also made sure to get the man's contact info for my aerial. Networking was always important. After that, we went to the junction for the rails, or trains as I knew them. These rails didn't leave very often because there weren't many of them, but we didn't have to wait for long before snagging a ticket and boarding. Just like that, I completed my job and was on my way home.